All right, everybody, welcome back to Obscuracast. We have another episode for you guys. Obviously, you guys know this is the show where we tug on loose threads of history, power, and technology, and we just sort of see what unravels with the conversation. I'm Blake here with my best friend, Dan and co-conspirator. How you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm glad that it is a Friday.
Absolutely. Good. I think we're all happy to be doing this on a Friday night. So we started this podcast just to give you guys a little misnomer or a little moniker why we started the podcast in the first place. We started as two guys just sort of having an idea and late night conversations, and we sort of got to unable to sort of keep them to ourselves and wanted to sort of share those insights and that kind of conversation with people that sort of think the same way and have an idea of what we're talking about. So tonight's episode, exactly the kind of rabbit hole that made Obscuracast what it is. As you guys know, we're in like 40 countries now, and we're getting a ton of listens more than ever before. We're on every streaming platform, from Good Pods to Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that kind of stuff. So we have a really auspicious guest this evening with us. We're thrilled to have him. Guy Morris, he's someone who's spent years connecting dots between geopolitics, biblical prophecy, intelligence operations, and emerging AI. You can dive into his work at GuyMorrisBooks.com. You can follow him on X at GuyMorrisBooks and also on Instagram at author Guy Morris. So if you've ever sort of wondered whether the weirdest parts of scripture, high-level tech, and shadowy programs might actually overlap in the real world, you're going to want to stay for the entire episodes because we're going to probably go into some deep rabbit holes and some fun stuff. So before we bring Guy in, a quick reminder, you can follow Obscuracast everywhere. Like I said, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, you name it, we're on the platform now. Also, keep up with us on X. We're just at Obscuracast, on TikTok at Obscuracast FM, and on Instagram at Obscuracast. So we post episode updates, clips, and strange threads, and that don't always make it on the show, or they're little snippets of the show. So make sure you guys check those out. And without any further ado, Guy, welcome to Obscuracast, sir. How you doing?
Thank you, Blake. Glad to have you. Hi, Dan.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah,
so the first
question,
we're excited to have you. So the first question, we want to get right into the nitty gritty, into the meat of the conversation, and sort of get a feel for you and your background and that kind of thing for people that may not have heard about you or just meeting you or being introduced to you for the first time. How did you end up on this path, sort of with the AI stuff and the obscure history and all that kind of thing? Sort of give us a quick 2 cents on that for us.
It was a journey of many paths and just odd things happening. I actually started off as a homeless runaway, GED at 15, functionally illiterate, got a chance to go to college and saw it as a chance to change my stars. So that was my day and night passion for 5 years, graduated with multiple degrees, got scholarships, accepted into Harvard because I had built a macroeconomic model that outperformed the Fed and pretty much everybody else and changed how we build models to this day. So while I never really thought of it that way, I had a knack. And so I went into 40 years of Fortune 100 companies, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM. And along the way, I was always an innovator. I was a thought leader and innovator, and I would always be trying to pull in the latest tool to solve an operational problem I had. One of them, I ran global teams, and I had to be able to communicate with them long before we had the internet. And we're right in the early ARPA days of the internet, when we were basically sitting on that backbone with, dial-in modems to get into Colombia and China and other places. And then there was at one point in time, and I did expert systems at one point this was an early stage of AI that didn't go that well. It was too manual, and it was before machine learning, and we were learning things along the way. But the event that really triggered me to pay close attention to not just technologies we were building for the enterprise, but how technologies could be used by governments and malicious people, came through a little small Associated Press article in the back of a science magazine. I can't remember which one. And this was in the late 90s. And the article said, and almost verbatim, the first sentence was, "A program has escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia." If I knew anything, to contact this professor at the agency or this FBI agent in charge of the investigation. And I stopped. I was like, I read it again. I kept thinking, okay, I read it wrong. It must have said lost or stolen or the program broke.
Right.
It said the program had escaped. And I'm thinking, holy cow, somebody at Associated Press is going to get fired for that one. And then I thought, or somebody at the laboratory is going to get fired.
I'll say your immediate response was probably like, who the hell needs to pay for this? Like now, immediately, yesterday.
I first thought it was a typo. And then I thought, well, what if it wasn't a typo? What if it was a slip? And so I spent several months. I had enough. I had enough training to start sitting down and talking to my architects in my company about, I started breaking down the problem. What does it mean to escape? What does that look like? What functions it would have to have? How would it know where to go? How would it stay invisible? Why didn't they just see the log about where it moved itself? And I started putting together all of these functional questions and starting them. And then once I kind of got an architectural model that I said, okay, that could work. That's functional. We see examples of that in worms and different theses. So I basically pulled some of these things together. Then was the fun part. I thought, okay, what if I'm James Bond's Q? Okay, Mr. Bond, we're going to build the perfect spy program for the Queen. It can go anywhere, stay invisible, and move all by itself. And Bond says, well, what would it do, Q? And that was when I had to say, I don't know yet, Bond. So was
that sort of the moment, I guess, was seeing in the technology magazine when things sort of flipped for you? Like, was that more of like, I have this normal career, I'm CEOs of these multitudes of companies, have been on the ground floor of AI, all of that kind of stuff. Was that sort of the flip of the switch? Like, I need to start writing about this kind of stuff?
The real flip of the switch came when the 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. That was the flip of the switch. That was the one that thinks, okay, this just isn't me just being a nerd, being theoretical and thinking about this stuff. This was a confirmation.
Sure.
And I told him that. I was obnoxious. I said, you wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I did it. I figured it out. You should hire me. They had to give me the we're not amused speech. But that was the moment when I started really seriously going, holy cow, if that was true, then what can they do now? And what have they been doing since? And I start looking at all of the various layers of technology that we've developed and looking at where the DARPA contracts have gone and looking where Google does work with the government and trying to put all the pieces. You can't say this is top secret. Let me read about it. But you can do what I did, which is put the pieces together, connect the dots. And so that really started me looking at not only what are we doing with now, that was a flip for the question of what is the government doing with technologies we're building in the enterprise sector. The flip for how fast AI was moving forward came with a famous incident, famous for nerds called the AlphaGo experiment at Google. So it went something like this. You guys all remember that years ago there was a Big Blue the Deep Blue IBM machine beat the world's best chess player.
Yeah. I do remember that. It was like back in the early or mid 2000s, right?
Now that was using expert systems of the technology I was telling you about. So Google was building a different model. They wanted to build a model that could beat the Chinese game, the world's best Chinese Go player. And Go is a far more complicated, complex, thousands of different potential moves over chess. So it's a much more complicated game. And they spent a year building an AI trained on all of the moves by this expert genius player. And they were able to get an AI to beat them. And everyone said, yay, we got a machine to do what Big Blue did in less time and less money and for a more complicated game. And then one of my heroes, Sir Geoffrey Hinton, who was then in charge of the DeepMind lab at Google, said, well, what if we just let the machine learn on its own? And this was a deep learning exercise for them. So they built a separate machine called Alpha Master, and they basically just gave it the rules of the game and the goal to win and let it run 24/7 running simulations. And within a single month, Alpha Master could beat AlphaGo every single time.
Question, like it was done.
It invented new moves.
Wow.
It wasn't learning from the masters. It was recreating the game from scratch. Hundreds of millions of simulations teaching it what not to do until it learned how to be the best and the fastest. And it only took a single month.
So it wasn't incredible. 1 move ahead. It was 20 moves ahead.
Could beat it every time.
That's funny.
That was the point when I started realizing this is getting serious. So then, of course, I'm still in my career at the time and I'm doing other things. But I had been experimenting with deep fakes and voice recognition software and voice command software back in the mid 90s. And so I was seeing all of these things with big data, quantum computing, a number of things coming together so that by 2018, I was in kind of a full-blown, I need to write books about this and more in the world of nobody's aware of this. It's right over the horizon. I need to start writing books about it. So my first book, Swarm, came out in 2020, talked about the AI that program that escaped. It talked about deep fake technology, cyber espionage and security issues, talked about lethal autonomous weapon systems that were already being developed back then. And all of these things, the world is just now starting to catch up on.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that you have speaking of AI, you have a book coming out. I think you alluded to at the end of June. I believe it's the AI Tsunami, a Survival Guide for Humanity. So if you guys haven't checked that out, obviously go to GuyMorrisBooks.com. I think, like you said, it's coming out at the end of June, at the end of this month. So look out for that. If you guys are Guy Morris fans, I'm sure it's going to be fantastic.
And that'll be a nonfiction. So that the purpose of the AI Tsunami is to really target normal people, small businesses, people who either don't really understand much about the technology and want to get over their fear by basically learning a little bit, but in a very easy to understand, non-technical way. And we deal with the good, the bad, and the existential ugly. We look at how AI could affect dating and relationships and governance and elections and crime and weapons and all kinds of things. And then we give you some guidance on what are some of the strategies you can consider for how to not only get over this, coming waves of change, but how do you actually thrive through them without losing your humanity?
Sure, for sure. So just sort of setting the tone, and I know Dan and I have taken a little bit look at your work. I'm not a huge reader. I'm sort of an audiobook guy. So I sort of listened to a little bit of some of your work. I obviously haven't read the AI Tsunami or listened to it yet, but there's some stuff, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's the pirate stuff that we talked about and we originally got together and started meeting and that kind of thing. Your books are thrillers at the core, but they're rooted in real research. That's where that's where it sort of shines. And so if I had to ask you, what's one real world event or discovery that made you think, okay, this is no longer just fiction. This is what it is. This is the information at hand. And then we can sort of turn it into a thriller on the back end. What was sort of that twinge for you?
Well, certainly discovering the program that escaped, that learning that I was correct in basically all the architecture and the reasons of why it escaped and what it could do led to other questions about what's it doing now. Did it malfunction? What if it didn't? What if it's still functioning elsewhere? And so that was certainly one of them. I think another one was realizing how far DARPA was in developing, and Israel and other places, in developing lethal autonomous weapon systems. So for those who don't know, it's okay to use AI to make a weapon more accurate, to make it more precise, to make it operate better, to make it more, to target better. But there needs to be a human in that kill decision process.
I agree with you 100%. Dan, I don't know how you feel about that. We actually had an interesting conversation about that on one of our, I think it was our original AI episode that we did.
Yeah,
Dan asked me a question,
that.
like for example, you think about target lock, right? For example, it is able to lock onto a heat signature and destroy the target. That in a nutshell is kind of like what we're talking about. It's able to recognize or have recognition of a parameter, right? So like it doesn't have to be heat. It can be light. It can be sound. It can be whatever you want it to be. But I think Dan and I would both agree that we've had AI for many, many years. Like it's been obviously incremental, but there have been instances in AI where like you have like Microsoft Sam from back in the day that would talk to you as you write out a sentence. We've had Siri, we've had all these instances. And I think Dan and I growing up, we were both born in 91. So we're still relatively young, but this has been around for a long time. Dan, I don't know how you feel about that. I've sort of felt like you mentioned that AI just sort of snapped into the universe and we've had it around for a while. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I mean, you sat with Dad and I talking. We used to hear Dad talk about when he was over in Vietnam and he did like Black Ops covert stuff. And he said the technology that our military has and our government is like 50 to 75 years ahead, probably now more. But he was, like I have a pair of his like first night vision goggles.
We've used
them.
That's the crazy part is we've used them.
And now like they have where I know like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, they got the AI fighter jets that are outperforming our regular, piloted jets. And
I was going to say it's the same thing with drone technology. Like drone technology is the exact same thing as the AI pilots that you're talking about.
And you start thinking about like the G-forces and how hard that is on the human body. If 100%. You don't have a pilot, you can probably do a lot of shit that you wouldn't be able to.
Well, isn't there like a crazy movie? The guy might know this. Isn't there like a crazy movie about an AI pilot or fighter jet that goes like rogue? I can't remember what the name of the movie is, but I might fact check that while you guys are talking because I'm curious.
That actually is it actual real technology. But what I based Swarm on was I said that one of the earliest places we will actually see this technology on the battlefield is through drones. And so one of the things in researching it, I realized that DARPA was not only working on a drone AI technology, they were working on what's called the Hive technology. Imagine 1,000
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
15-inch drones, weaponized with high-speed cameras, talking to each other at like 50,000 times per second, clearing through a village and identifying targets and taking them out without having to bomb the village. So where you're not destroying the infrastructure for the next 3 generations, right? Creating this huge rebuilding process. You're just taking out the combatants. That's the idea. But the complexities of actually getting that to work is one of the reasons when I realized what they were trying to do. And this was back in 2019. So it was in the first book, Swarm. So it came out in 20. So I realized then that now it's good that they haven't deployed it yet, because I'm sure that the AI is still trying to advance on that. But
100%.
there's so many reasons that could have gone wrong. And so we're trying to, with technologies that we don't really fully know how to control yet, and then we're using it in ways that could be life and death.
If that gets into the wrong hands, could you imagine?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the crazy thing is, could you imagine? Because the type of people that have been on this earth that have been able to wage war without AI technology, having to actually have their finger on the button is kind of scary by itself. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade. But like, imagine, like, Dan, you and I had the conversation about in the AI episode that we had. You asked me about the atomic bomb or what Oppenheimer did with that kind of thing. Somebody's finger on the button that's a human being that I have not necessarily control over, but imagine, like, we talked about deep learning, and we'll get into that a little bit. Deep learning and generative AI, because, Guy, I was going to ask you, what scares you more? I think I know your answer, but I sort of want to hear your take on it. But, like, for example, you have somebody's finger on the button, you have an AI fingers on the button that has its own reasoning, say it's deep learning AI. Do you trust the AI to make the right decision, or is it going to make an analytical decision purely based on data? So, Guy, I want to sort of hear what you think about that scenario.
I think the other question that really needs to go along with that is, who's accountable?
100%. We had that conversation as well, but go ahead.
So, yeah, and that's the thing. I wouldn't trust the AI, even if it had the right answer. The question becomes accountability. Who's accountable for taking human life? And we're developing these systems that remove us from that accountability. And more and more, these kind of systems remove the accountability for that. But at a certain point in time, somebody, even now, has to say, somebody said, fire the missile.
100%.
When we remove that and we just got the machine firing the missile, we lose the ability to understand what the machine was doing, because the AI is a black box anyway. We lose the ability to correct its thinking if it was wrong, and we lose accountability, which basically then blows back. If you don't have anybody accountable, who's it going to blow back to? All the way to the top.
Yeah, I also wonder about the accountability aspect. It's a machine.
Yeah.
Well, just make another one. Just manufacture another one. Like, it takes sort of I get what you're saying. Well, from the machine standpoint, the accountability sort of goes away because it's not a human being, essentially. Exactly. Dan, what were you going to say?
There was and Guy, I'm sure you've heard of this. Have you heard of it was a event that took place during the Cold War, and Russia, they thought that there was a threat coming in, and like the time bomb came to, like, the ticker went down to like 5 seconds, and the guy had to make a decision on whether it was an actual threat from the US, and like he didn't hit the launch button, and thank God, because it was a false alarm that went off, but the timer got down to, like, I think literally like 5 seconds.
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I can't remember the name of the incident, but I think it's a perfect example of, that's a perfect example of why we need people in accountability to check each other. Even though supposedly Putin or the president has the finger on the button, they're surrounded by other people. They're not actually going
100%. It's not a sovereign state that's in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, 100%.
Basically say, is this a sane, rational move? And there's checks and balances. We don't have that when we start handing over decision making to a machine. Now, I've been a technology advocate my entire career, made my entire career on innovation and innovative thinking and new technologies to solve old problems. Those were Every single case, I was empowering a human to make better decisions. Now we're basically taking that decision power away from a human and giving it to a machine that A, will become smarter than any human on the planet. Not a question, it's going to happen. B, will replicate itself. It's almost there already. Matter of fact, 80% of the current public released code of Claude was written and tested by the machine. 3, we're already teaching the machines what, who, and how to kill. No question that machine knowledge can spread.
Sure.
So this is a paradigm change technology. And the reason I've come out of my closet to say this one we have to be super, super careful with. We need to have a non-proliferation treaty right now on AI. And the fact is, I wanted it like several years ago. Max Tegmark came out with a letter in 2023 arguing for it. We're years behind it, but we need to get to a non-proliferation because you're right. Put this technology in the hands of a drug lord, a dictator, a warlord, a sociopathic, a megalomaniac, stock market hedge fund guy, a sociopathic trillionaire. We all can name one.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. 100%.
Put that power in their hands, and we lose part of our humanity in that process.
So go ahead, Danny. Go ahead.
So would that be like a United Nations like thing where the countries come together and do like what do you think needs, like how does that get basically controlled or monitored, or like what?
There's 5 nations that really are leading in the AI war. The US, China, obviously. Behind them, kind of far behind them, would become Israel, then Russia, and then you've got a little bit of Iran and North Korea basically just trying to feed off of some of the others to see what they can do. They're the rogue actor that if they get the wrong application and they get access to it, it could go bad because they have nothing to lose. But certainly the top 3. And if we can get the major, now there's also AI development going on in Europe and elsewhere, but most of the real major innovations going on between the US and China. So
Makes sense.
In my mind, we need to be sitting down at a table saying, okay, both of us, rather than talking about this competition of who's going to win, let's talk about what are the guardrails about how we're all going to stay safe.
Makes sense.
Now,
so
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Part of that answer, and I think this also gets kind of slept aside in the process, is not only who's safe, but how we keep this bit destroying the environment.
Yeah, so that was also a question that sort of leads into the next question that I had for you. So I know that Dan and I had previously talked on some episodes, obviously, about as AI and infrastructure and that kind of stuff has to obviously follow suit and get more sophisticated, right? What is going to happen to the environment from your point of view as somebody that's looked at this in depth? So my general question, I want you to sort of extrapolate and sort of take it your own way on what you've found, being sort of more of an expert in the field than the two of us. Even though we know a lot about AI, you've been on the forefront when it started, the dark times when it wasn't really a thing and it was very generic and that kind of thing. If you had to sort of pick one thing, if you were walking down the street and somebody said, what is on the horizon for us as a warning sign, that kind of thing, as we're sort of walking down this path, what do you think that would be if you had to boil it down?
To one thing, the cost-benefit ratio. Who pays, who wins? One example, one data center, the Hyperion Data Center in Louisiana, 3,650 acres. That's as much as like 68 football fields, 4 times the size of Central Park. Requires as much power as like 2 million homes, can require as much as like 38 million or billion, I can't remember the right number. No, billion is the global one. Million gallons per year of water. Leaves contaminated wells and water infrastructure for other nations. Right now, the data centers in Virginia alone are using 40%. There's 600 data centers and they're using 40% of all the power in the state of 9 million people. So part of this is who's going to pay the cost so that those who are going to benefit. So what's the cost-benefit ratio? Who are the winners and who are the losers?
Makes sense. Dan, did you want to sort of ask any questions about sort of like the power consumption and that kind of thing? I know we've talked about it, so.
Yeah. So where I live in Pittsburgh, the town over from me, and then the town that I'm in, both towns are considering literally in the next like week or two having community meetings about data centers. So
glad they're having community meetings. Some of these are going in NDAs at the community leader level. And some of these deals are being done without the community even being aware.
So essentially, the communities don't have a voice. It's just happening right before them, and they can't do anything about it.
That happened in Utah, didn't that happen with Kevin O'Leary with his data center that he's building, I think?
One, and there was another one in Georgia where they were basically sucking water from a community 50 miles away, depleted their water supply.
Yeah, that's great. So, because I know, like, my electric bill already is obviously high. Like, I've heard that they make us pay it. Like, they try to make it seem like it's going to be them that pays the bill, but really, we're the ones that are going to have to pay
Absolutely. And so that's why I say this is a who's the winners and who's the losers. Are the taxpayers going to be paying for all these enormous environmental and infrastructure upgrades so that a few companies and a few guys at the top can become trillionaires?
Sure.
That is not so we could write things faster and make some cute videos and images. We have to ask ourselves, who's really winning and what are the real trade-offs? And it's not that there's not good things. I think there's amazing benefits in medical field, in education field, in material sciences, other sciences. I think there's amazing benefits of AI that we can and we should take advantage of as a society, but only if we're making the trade-off decisions as a society. And right now, we're not being allowed to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, while you were sort of talking, Guy, it's almost like we have to implement what we've been doing from the start with government and other things as checks and balances.
Exactly.
There's got to be somebody in charge. There's got to be regulations. There's got to be standards. And, Dan and I have talked about and sort of mold over that. How do we do that from your perspective? With the research that you've done, the books that you've written, and the stories that you've told, what does that look like?
Well, first off, I write thrillers. So the whole job of a thriller is to take something that seems plausible and saying, gee, what could go wrong? And the more wrong you could make it go and seem plausible, the better the thriller. So 100%. I live on that edge of what can go wrong. Now, as a guy who implemented technology for decades, that's actually a really important skill before you do any implementation of major technology. We would always, and some of my customers and some of my team members hated me for this, but I would insist on a thorough, sometimes 2 or 3 days, depending upon the complexity of the deal, risk management session where we would probe everybody. I want to know everything that could go wrong, everything
100%.
we might not know, everything that we couldn't get maybe in time. And I want to know all the things what's the risk, what's the minefield look like? And then we're going to look at how do we either mitigate or provide a contingency for that.
Sure.
That's the way that you manage successful technology. We are racing ahead so fast that most of our legislators and most of the investors and many of these communities are not looking at the risks first and asking themselves, okay, a data center goes in. How many jobs, at what salaries, what sort of property tax? Are you getting a deal? Are you going to put in your own infrastructure for electricity, water, and water waste management? Or is that going to come onto the community source? Who's going to build that? Who's going to pay for that? We need to ask the questions first before we get this mentality of, oh my God, we're competing with China. We just have to do everything we can to compete with China. No holds barred. And the question has to ask, compete them, win them with what? So who gets there first in terms of a super intelligent machine smarter than anybody on the planet? Okay, then what? We're not asking the right questions.
It's essentially the walk, crawl, run debate is that we're getting way too ahead of ourselves and things need to not necessarily slow down. I would say they need to be controlled. Maybe the best way to put it.
Control intelligently. We need to create some guardrails we all believe in and we all feel secure about that. Make sure that we're building this in a way that's safe for our communities, safe for humanity, safe for our youth.
Dan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, it just seems like most of these investors and high up, CEOs nowadays, you just think, can we do this? And they do it. They don't think, should we do this?
Exactly.
Hey, can we do it? It's like the Jurassic Park quote, gee, you thought this whole time of pushing, can I do this? You never thought, should I create the dinosaurs? Should I bring them back?
Well, and to be fair, many of the key executives, many of the top executives at least, certainly I think from Anthropic, not from all of them, but a little bit from OpenAI, a little bit from Microsoft and Google. Some of the men that I admire most were the men who were instrumental in building Google DeepMind and machine learning and bringing us into this age. They retired from Google because they became concerned about where this was going to lead and
Absolutely.
whether or not we were being careful with this new knowledge, whether humanity was ready for this. And I don't think we are. So there's legislation that's been proposed that tries to look at some of these guardrails. I haven't seen the legislation. I don't know the details. I just read today that Congress now has a bipartisan bill that's been drafted, but there's a long way between drafted and accepted and funded. So right now we're behind the EU by about 3 years in terms of a basic AI law. They want to create, and what's happening now is all the states are going out and starting to create their own laws, which is going to create a nightmarish patchwork of laws for these companies to work around. Right. So they want to basically come up with a national law that is sort of usurps all these state laws. But I'm not sure that they've been able to come up with the framework that's the right direction yet. And I haven't seen the details, but it's good that they're moving in that direction. So I want to encourage them to keep moving in that direction. We do need those guardrails, but we also need education of the public. There's a number of things that are going on with AI, dating relationships, deep fakes and frauds, bank frauds, election frauds, all kinds of things that people are phishing emails. There's all kinds of things that the public will now have to deal with as we start to manage this technology and how it's getting out of hands and in the controls of the wrong people.
Yeah, so I like I said, this is when you were on the forefront and that kind of thing. I'm assuming, I might be wrong. Assuming is obviously something that not necessarily dumb people do, but foolish people do, is assuming before you have the real facts. So when you started putting these ideas out there and writing these books and coming up with these notions of, we need to have a better handle on this, things could get out of control, that kind of thing. How did people react to the books and the way you think and sort of your outlook on this whole AI thing? Were they were they sort of retractful, or were they more of like, something's off, we just can't sort of pin it to one thing? Or how did they sort of react? Give me that.
My architects in the industry are like, get dead on, dude, I'm glad you're saying something, right? We say something, but our bosses ignore us. We can't really say anything in public because, we got to keep our job. My consumers, the people reading my books, at first thought it was all science fiction. This is science fiction. The government really can't do this. I said, yes, they really can. That's an actual.
And they have. That's the really scary part, and they have.
No, they have.
And so, part of it is trying to get, and then the reaction is fear. Oh my God, I don't want to do I don't want AI. I don't want to know. It's like, la, 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 la. And I said, no, that's the wrong reaction. You need to be informed. You need to be educated.
100%.
Just like you need to know how to be aware to protect yourself in a dark alley, right?
Mm-hmm.
First off, don't go there. So there's you don't do with AI. And I tell people, don't use your biometrics for your security. That's your number one don't do. But as we go through it, it's more important. I find that if I could explain what AI is, and you're right, parts of this have been things that have been developed for years, and we've already incorporated in our society and we just take them for granted. Our GPS system, right? Our
100%, yep.
Our Siri systems, a lot of things that we already have are built on these components of AI that we've been building for decades. We're now at a new generation because of machine learning and advanced tech and neural networks where it's leaping forward, and it's about to make another enormous leap forward with neuromorphic quantum computing. That's going to be scary. But people need to be aware of what is outside their perimeter of control and what's inside the perimeter of control. And they need to be able to then take informed decisions about what's inside their perimeter of control based on their life preferences, their career goals, their technology preferences, and that's when they can decide what makes a healthy decision for them. That's what I try to do in the AI tsunami. Educate, give them the good, the bad, the existential ugly. Some of it you can control. It's just going to happen. But that doesn't mean you're powerless or you don't have a voice. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think Dan and I would agree. He can obviously speak for himself. We've also talked about the fact that like the knowledge is what is powerful. If you don't have the knowledge, then you're sort of blind to one side or both sides of the argument. If it's worst case scenario, if you know nothing about AI, you don't know how to use it, And one of my biggest tricks of the trade as far as when I talk to people about AI itself is you need to be using it as a tool to get something done, not as a dependency. I think the dependency aspect is what we're going to get into real trouble with. Dan, you just want to give your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, it's kind of like, the book, The Art of War. Like, you got to know your enemy. Not that the AI is the enemy, but you got to know the good and the bad. If you can't acknowledge strengths of something, even if it's bad, you got to acknowledge the strengths. And if it's good, you got to acknowledge what it's bad, like a give and take. AI is incorporated, like you said, already. A lot of people don't realize how much AI is already incorporated in their life. So I love the people that say, I'm too old for that, or I'm not going to learn that because I don't need to deal with it. It's like, well, you better learn something, because whether you want to or not, you're already using it. You don't realize it. Number one. Number two, it's only going to get, more advanced.
Well, and I do leave room for those people who just say, I want to unplug. That's a fair decision.
Yeah.
That's a fair choice to say, I'm near the end of my retirement. I'm going to retire early. I don't really need a computer. I don't really need AI. I don't really need a phone that could do any of that stuff. I'm just going to be calling my kids and my friends. That's a fair decision. Or there's some people who just say, I don't want to be involved in the tech industry at all, or that big brother kind of world, and who want to just be farmers someplace. Yeah. So I allow that it's and I want people to know that that's a perfectly healthy choice.
Yeah, but what about like the government or companies like banks wanting to just completely get rid of cash and just go straight to the, crypto and all that stuff? Like,
well, that's going to happen. That's going to happen too. And that's a separate issue. Now, AI is going to help enable that transition because it'll help with security and fraud and some of the management of some of the challenges of that kind of platform. They have to scale it for global scale. But one of the things that's going on in my book I'm writing now is the government switching from saying we're going to basically pay off our debt by issuing crypto, and
good Lord,
and paying off with crypto. And that's going to make some people super rich.
Use a fake currency that was just enveloped out of nowhere.
Well, that's sort of the mentality of crypto, right?
Well, that's insane.
So there'll be somebody that basically says we can no longer pay our debt. We'll just write a crypto for it. But yeah, there's things that are going to happen in the banking system that are going to change and how they change. But that's the next evolution for that. Yeah. And there's a lot of resistance to that. Now, I believe in a cash economy. I think that a lot of people love the cash economy because it means that you don't have to have the government spying on everything you do. But as soon as the government has that capability, you know that it will be used in negative ways.
100%. So sort of flipping to that tip of sort of like what's going to happen if things do happen. I know you spend a lot of time in your writing and that kind of stuff and sort of your thought process about looking at prophecies and what the sort of road looks like down the ways a little bit, and maybe even more in a more biblical sense, because we obviously talked about that. You sort of tap into that stuff too. Do you see prophecy as more of a warning, a script that some people are trying to follow, or is it as sort of a mix of both?
Well, I'm going to have to kind of take a little detour here, if I can, about describing what prophecy analytics is and why I came to that foundation. I'm a man of faith, but I'm also a man of science and logic. I'm an economist. I have, if something starts to sound too mythological and detached from reality for me, it doesn't matter how spiritual it sounds, I lose touch. So I would, people, whenever you talk about the prophet, you get all kinds of lunatics coming out of the fringe, and I never wanted to be a lunatic, but I wanted to know the answers for myself. And I wanted it was somewhere between has absolutely no relevance to our current time to it's happening right now, but people can't really explain it in a way that connects to the real world. And so I said, well, let's take this like any scientific. Let's create a theory. Let's say we're living in the last days. How would I actually validate that and prove that on a mathematical level? And I wasn't sure at first, but I wound up realizing I was actually reading a National Geographic magazine that talked about the loss of fish stocks, and every major fishing ground on the entire planet was down by over a third. And there were predictable reasons: ocean pollution, overfishing, reef loss, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, when you look at the geologic record, I had to go back 25 million years to see that much fish loss in a single generation. Mm-hmm. It was I can't remember, but I believe it was a super volcano in Siberia at the time. I can't remember the name of the event. That started me thinking. I said, there was a prophecy called the fourth trumpet that talked about a flaming rock falling from the sky, landing in the ocean, third of the fish of the sea die, and the ocean is polluted. And I realized, okay, so that was the flaming rock is an allegory for something, but the outcome, the actual attribute, is a third of the fish of the sea are dead, the oceans are polluted. Well, that was an outcome that was pretty wild back then.
Yeah.
But I've never seen any rock falling in the ocean, but we've now got verifiable, scientific, documented evidence of the outcome. And so I basically did this. I said, I wonder if that pattern follows through other prophecies, allegory versus outcome attribute. And if so, and it did, if so, I wonder if I could start identifying attributes and lining them up to see, is this prophecy completed? Is this prophecy completed? And if I can get 5 correlations, if there's 5 attributes, and if I can line up all 5, that's a perfect correlation. I can calculate the probability of that event through versus known human history. And then I could look at all of the places where I've got correlations and calculate cumulative probabilities. Now, I kind of expected I would wind up debunking 90% of everything.
Yeah.
But once I stripped away the allegory and the biases of the Ayatollahs, the Antichrist, and all that garbage that we've been getting over the last few decades, once I got rid of all of that garbage and I stripped it down to, got rid of the theology and everything else, just said, these are the attributes. Can I correlate that? I was able to correlate the end of the Gentiles, the 7 churches, 6 of the 7 seals, 5 of the 7 trumpets, both beasts, both dragons, image of the beast, mark of the beast, man of lawlessness, on the world stage with near perfect correlations in almost every case, right now with a cumulative probability of 3.2 to 1, that 3.2 trillion to 1, that we're living in a prophetic era.
So essentially, you boiled it down to absolutely brass tacks, took all the mysticism out, and literally just looked at the facts.
And what does that tell us about where we're at in this prophetic timeline? And so it tells us that, because the theory was either we live in a very unique time. So either we live in a very unique time that's creating a lot of anxiety. And so people are thinking, it's all the end, or there's actually some factual correlation. And I didn't want to I wanted to find out something that I could actually factually correlate and calculate. And so that became the framework. Now, because it has of the way it was modeled in my fictional series, I gave this set of algorithms to the AI to own, so that the AI can talk about the correlation between world events and prophetic events, and without all of the religious dogma and back and forth. Now, in doing that, it leads to an undeniable conclusion. For those people, prophecy is not about a deity, angry or otherwise, coming to destroy humanity. It does appear to be a warning of how humanity could destroy itself. And that is important because it puts the responsibility for us to act. That means we may be able to change those choices. Now, I don't know that we can change the nature of men, and the world system seems to be kind of on a track all its own, that even though the bulk of people want it to go in a different direction, it just seems to keep going on this headlong direction where it's going. But it does seem to have a correlation to real world. Now, taking that approach, I can then model that and look at some of the other traditions like Hindu and Hopi and Maya. And I have a harder time getting through some of their allegories versus facts, but some of those things correlate with the Hindu and the Maya as well.
So you mentioned obviously being somewhat religious, at least in the earlier part of your life, you're not now, which...
I'm not religious. I'm a man of faith.
Fair enough.
Faith is a visual response. Religion is all the rituals and all the traditions.
100%. So Dan grew up Irish Catholic. I grew up Episcopalian. So we both have the flavor of sort of that idea of religion and that kind of thing. So
seriously, I spend more time on Sunday mornings in bars with my mom than church.
Is that right? Yeah. Is that right? So like I said, so we sort of all had this sort of idea of what religion is and that kind of thing. So where do you see the sort of clearest overlap right now between prophetic texts, whether, some of the religions that you sort of referenced there with Hinduism or Buddhism and that kind of stuff? Where do you see that sort of overlap between the prophetic text that you've come across and that kind of stuff, and geopolitics or events on the ground? Like, how do you sort of see the correlation? What's the biggest one for you?
The Hindu was more specific. The Maya basically hinted that that humanity has gone through cycles of creation and destruction. The Hindu has what they call the Yuga traditions, and the Yuga traditions actually break it down into 4 different cycles of creation and building, and then the final cycle is the Kali Yuga, which is described with corruption and malice and hate and violence and all of the things that basically define the world today. And so what they say is that that destruction then gives birth to a new creation, and that the world has gone through this multiple times. And they look to their Veda traditions and some of their old traditions that go back 5,000 years to talk about this. Now, in that sense, what we're looking at now is, I don't really necessarily see it as a total collapse of humanity, but it's a collapse of civilization that creates a do-over, right? That creates a start-over button. That has benefits because you get rid of the power structures, you get rid of the corruption, you get rid of the polluting environments, you get rid of the things that are causing the problem. But it's difficult because now you're starting from a new infrastructure. And some of that knowledge is lost, and we've experienced lost knowledge in the past. And so I think we're close to that, or I think that seems to be where we're heading. And if we look at sort of the existential potential threats of AI and combining that with some of the corruption of our geopolitical systems and some of the debt-laden financial trade systems that we have, I don't know, people we talk about $38 billion of debt in America. Most people don't realize that as a globe, we're in debt by like $250 billion. And that's like 140% of our global GDP. And at some point in time, that's not sustainable, right?
Yep.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying, I was agreeing with you.
Okay.
So
they're saying that we're in a cycle, and from our economics, from our climate, from our geopolitics, our weapon systems, with now AI, with the potential of creating a sort of dystopic controlling kind of governing environment, it looks like that might be part of our cycle. But in my prophecy analytics, one of the key principles is you can't use prophecy to predict the future. That's always proves out to be wrong. You can only use prophecy to find the attributes to figure out where you're at, what's completed now, where you're at. That's the only place where it's good, which means I try not to predict the future of where we're going and to keep watch. Things could be changed and I could be wrong. Now, that's the other piece of that is I see the combination between science and religion. So the sciences are now talking about, we're now starting to get more sophisticated in our physics and our science and our math and our particle experimentations to realize that the universe, very likely, all the physics theories on the planet, all including relativity, string theory, quantum theory, and there's a couple others, postulate from the math that there's multiple dimensions to the universe. Now, they're going to call it multiple dimensions, and they might describe what they believe the attributes of those dimensions are. It's theory. We can't test it. In theology, we have a similar problem. We have earth, heaven, hell, all these purgatories. We have these dimensions in the universe. And so while science is looking at what is it, how does it function, religions have looked at who's the consciousness and what's our relationship with that consciousness, how are we interacting with that. And I think at some level and point in time, and one of the things I try to bring out in my books is how those things combine, how faith is a quantum level entanglement with a universal quantum consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so it allows us to really bridge that gap without basically saying you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Right. It says, well, we're both kind of right a little bit.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that Dan and I have talked about in a multitude of our episodes too is that, like, why can't it be both? Why can't we have people that believe in religion and that kind of thing, and then we have the nuts, big air quotes, that believe in aliens? We've made the contention between the two of us. What if they're the same thing?
And how do we know aliens are nuts? How do we know?
Exactly, 100%. What if you're just taking an image of something that an alien is taking the image of? It's the same thing. It's just a different way of thinking about it.
Well, what if we can't see it? You know, there's like animals, like dogs, cats, they can hear certain sound waves, see different things. I can't tell you the amount of times my dog is like staring at something in the hallway, and I'm like, "What are you seeing, bud?" Like.
So what's to say that there's elements of the universe, dimensions of the universe that we just simply genetically don't have the perception powers to see?
And why is that so hard for people to understand, I guess, is the big question.
Yeah. Now, there's some people that might be sensitive who do say, I can see ghosts, or I can feel these dimensions, or I have these visions, or the CIA proved that certain people could do remote viewing, right? So they proved the skill. Now, was it scalable and weaponizable? That they didn't do that, but they proved that it existed, which proves the layer of dimensionality, the layer of consciousness that exists. So what I'm trying to play with is, so let's not assume that either our scientific or our religious perceptions of all that are completely accurate and whole. Let's assume there's gaps and maybe overlaps.
Well, I was going to say, Dan, you talked about your father, who obviously was like a second father to me, is as much of a father as my real dad is. You talked about when we were originally meeting with Guy about him astral projecting multiple times. Like, that's a great example of something that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, and I mean, my dad had a very high IQ. Like, he scored like off the charts IQ and stuff like that. So he studied. Guy, I'm assuming you're familiar with Edgar Casey.
Yeah.
Okay, Dad studied Edgar Casey and a bunch of Carl Jung and, a bunch of people. And what's interesting is he also studied ancient histories and mythology and stuff like that and a bunch of different religions all over. And what's really interesting is that a lot of your ancient civilizations, a lot of your original core base of religions talk about like God being within you. It's Gnosticism. It's not, and the whole universe is entangled, and we're all one. We're not all separate. We all think we're separate. We're all one. So if we're all connected, you can be somewhere here, but really be somewhere else. And he has several witnesses because I guess my uncle was there and their cousin. This was out in California. My dad was going to UCSB. My uncle was going to UCLA. And I think my dad and my uncle's cousin was going to UCSB as well. They all were taking psychology. I think my uncle was going for his master's at this point, and their cousin was going for his doctorate. Anyway, my dad had practiced, like turning lights on and off with just his brain. And now this is the early 70s. Like they just got out of, serving in Vietnam and stuff like that. He was able to astral project from LA to Cleveland, Ohio. He visited my grandmother and grandfather, so his mom and dad. He visited one of his best friends, and he visited his sister, my Aunt Shirley. And my dad was able to pinpoint new things that were in the room in his friend's house. He yelled out and said hi to his mom and dad. My grandmother actually woke up and got my grandfather out of bed and said, "Danny's home." And then my dad saw my aunt carrying her daughter, my dad's niece, out of a car into the house, put her into bed. He called them the next day, didn't tell my uncle or cousin anything. Nobody talked. He called the people. They're like, "Oh my God, are you in town?" Every single person said, "Are you here? Are you in town?" And he was like, "No, I'm not." But he told them every single thing that he pointed out. And I mean, it's really incredible.
And there was a time when, and academia is really good at dismissing things that they can't replicate in the laboratory and take some sort of credit for. And when you're young, it's hard to know what to believe, what not to believe. So either you tend to be somebody who believes everything, or somebody who basically tests everything. And I was always a tester.
Yeah, there was never a middle ground for us. It was either this is right or wrong. It's very moral, like right and wrong type of thing, where it's sort of absolute versus abstract.
Yeah, but as somebody who's dealt with new, scientific theories, economic theories, technology theories, I find that sometimes the difference between somebody who's willing to take that bridge and not as taxonomy. What are the terms we're using to what we're trying to do? And a little bit of courage to be wrong, not to be afraid to be wrong if the test turns wrong. That's proving something wrong is a valid test. And so I was always more curious with trying to say, can I prove it wrong? Can I prove it positive? And when I see enough evidence that has enough consistency, where there's enough independence between those individuals, and not only in our day and age of hyper social media baloney, but when you can find that evidence traced throughout history, you have to then start to draw conclusions to say, this is real. We may not understand what it is, but there's something real there. Now, some of the theories that I tend to more believe in, that there are some dimensional creatures that have lived here alongside humans but I'm also believing that some of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing is interdimensional. And that tends to resonate with me more because that explains some of the things that the craft can do and some of the other experiences that go beyond what we know to be the laws of physics in this dimension. So that extra dimensionality is the Now that is part of what I think. Now I may be wrong on some of it. Maybe there are technologies, Mercury, electromagnetic technologies around Mercury, stabilizations, other propulsion fields that are, we've read about. I'm excited to know more about those. What bothers me is the lack of transparency. So I'm actually researching that for the next book. And I'm finding frustration because there's good information, but that's kind of like, well, everybody already knows that. Then there's some of the new information, the disclosure information that's coming out. But I get the sense they're not telling us everything. They're only telling us what they want us to know.
100%.
The videos are real and we should be afraid of them. We need more money in our budget.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of okay, what aren't you telling me? And then there's also the loony bin that you just can't trust, and that can go almost anywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how to find the factual, semi-factual, but then extend I have to speculate into what are they not telling us. And that is harder because I'm trying not to fall into the loony bin range.
Right.
I mean, take one step and you're lost forever. You're sucked into the work.
Yeah. They also love to pump out disinformation too, where they'll put wrong stuff out purposefully.
Yeah, exactly.
So that way they can discredit somebody and they know that that's the person that said it. So they'll,
that becomes their scapegoat. What you were talking about earlier with the accountability is that we have something to point it to right now. If we don't have somebody to point it to, then we're kind of in limbo, I guess, to put it mildly. So we obviously know there's a lot of good that comes with people that are semi-religious or religious, or like yourself and myself, because I'm agnostic now. I don't know if I prefaced that earlier. So I am a man of faith as well. I believe in something higher than myself. I just don't necessarily know what it is. I don't have something to point it to necessarily. It's more like an energy, that kind of thing. So given religion or belief, how would you say, can you give us like a specific example in your research with like prophecies and AI and that kind of stuff, where it's been used not as a advantage, but more of as like a deterrent type scenario, essentially like a tool for like control or that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, you see it all the time. It's in pop culture everywhere. It's that the Ayatollah is the Antichrist, the Pope is the Antichrist, Obama is the Antichrist. They throw that term out. It's almost this comical, ubiquitous term for anybody of pure evil who has ultimate control. But that doesn't fit the actual attributes, right? So when you break down, there's some few prerequisites. First off, multiple antichrists according to the Bible. Paul said that, and we can look through history and see multiple super evil people. That's a reincarnating kind of attribute. So that alone isn't a descriptive kind of thing. If they want to talk about the prophesied sort of end times thing, well, you have to first say, well, are we in the end times? Because if not, well, he's just another evil guy, and we've had
right. How many, right? Not to put it lightly, but we've had a few.
Yeah, been there, seen you, done that. And then it has to be part of the beast system with 7 heads, 10 crowns, and 10 horns that up until the last few decades nobody's been able to define, and many people still miss it. So I broke that down into the attribute level, and really what we're looking at is the G7, the 10 monarchies of EU, basically the European Western economies, and the 10 financial centers that basically control 65% of the world economy. Those are
pretty scary, considering. It's pretty scary.
And once you start looking at the beast as the powerful, the thing that you can't control, it's powerful and seems to be everywhere and has all of these, has power over currency and power over armies and all these other things, that fits. And then when you look at the other attributes that fall out of that in terms of currency changes and everything else, that fits as well. Now, until you can so only of that structure then does this man of lawlessness come out. And then there's 20 attributes for that man of lawlessness. Now, I knew those attributes. I defined them back in the 80s sometime. Maybe it was the 80s, early 90s. At that point, the worst guy on the planet didn't fit more than 40% of them, right? You take the one that's most common. Well, he's a liar. Well, so is every politician. It's got to be something more than that, or it's got to be a liar to some degree that we've never seen before. Right. So then, so you get to the point where you start ticking off those individual attributes, including it has to have a following of a cult-like following of people who believe the delusions and profit from the delusions and all of there has a profit part of it. And all these other pieces, and only one man in all of history has met all the prerequisites, and so far, 19 of the 20 attributes.
So he's not even 100%.
Not 100% yet, but the 20th one is the currency one, and that could be in the future.
100%.
So I try not, it's not about politics. I try to say this is, one of the keys to look at these things is to strip away biases. And we all have some of them. And I had to start realizing this framework. I had to start becoming aware of my own cultural, age, technology, affluence, racial, religious, all kinds of political, all kinds of biases that we filter into kind of what we view. And it wasn't until I had to kind of strip these things away and say, well, if I take no biases at all, if I just take factual information, what picture does that paint? And that's kind of where I started to come up with. So there's one example, a man of lawlessness that people have said for centuries, he's the evil one. And now we actually have one person on a world stage that fits 19, all the prerequisites in 19 of the 20 attributes. Is that the person? I don't know. Maybe it's pretty damn close. We'll see. If it is, then all we have to do is wait a little longer and we'll find out.
Sure. So with all of that research,
at the end of the day, here's the last thing. It's just another sign. Not more important than that. Just one more sign.
So as you've looked through all the research and that kind of thing, with psyops and, that kind of thing, as far as psychological warfare and trying to get ahead on somebody's consciousness so they think think a certain way or do a certain thing or perform a certain action or treat people a certain way, slap whatever moniker you want on that and table it for a second. Do you sort of see modern media and social platforms from being different than classic psyops? Have they evolved from classic psyops? How do you sort of think that correlation sort of comes into view?
Classic psyops. Classic psyops, the term actually started in the early 1920s or 30s, and it was actually for a marketing firm. A genius marketing guy came up with all of these certain, I think there was like 12 different, action items that you do. You can basically convince people of almost anything. It was, you got to all have the same terminology, from station to station, from newspaper to newspaper. It has to call it the, whatever term you're going to use, the white rage or the Nazi, whatever term of the day that you're going to use, that's the term that you're going to see. And we see it all the time on news stations. They say the same term on channel after channel after channel, newscast after newscast after newscast. And then they're basically bringing in disinformation. They're going to give you a little bit of truth and a little bit of false truth, right? And there's all these various things and it's blaming the other. That's the other one or the other one. It's always somebody to blame. It's blaming the other, making an enemy out of someone to cover up something else over here. So when you look at what they were developed, you realize, oh my gosh, well, these are basically used in propaganda all over the world. Russia uses them, China uses them, Germany used them, we use them. We used them in World War II to fight the Nazis. We're using them to fight when we went into the Iraq War and we went into all of these other things. These are the same things that were used. And so once you recognize what they are, you can easily see them and realize who's trying to cover up something or trying to get you to believe something else. And you can take an independent mind and then start to research, the facts behind that maybe you're disagreeing with what they're saying to find, you can research that if you're so anal enough and nerdy enough like me to do stuff like that.
Well, I think we're a trio of nerds. I don't think there's any secrecy about that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I know we can also take into account too that technology being the end goal or the X that marks a spot for multitudes of people, even military superpowers. I mean, Dan and I have talked about it on previous episodes as well about, like, you were talking about the Nazi regime they tried to experiment with time travel and all sorts of crazy stuff where this is not new information. You're either turned away from it and don't want to indulge, which is fine, completely 100% your prerogative. But I think the warning that you're getting at, and the three of us are sort of on the same tip with, is that the information is now having the information is better than not having it. I think we would all agree with that.
And like Hitler and the Nazis, they got, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they get super deep into like the occult?
Yeah.
Like super deep, like Aleister Crowley, like all that stuff, and like infatuated with UFOs in like Antarctica. I know Nazis were doing Antarctica. Expeditions.
They were looking for the Aryan race in the Himalayas. They were really into a lot of cultish things. And ironically, some of those, the Nazis were so afraid of the Freemasons that they actually raided all the Freemason temples across Europe, stole all of their archives, sacred archives. They held them up in a bunker in Berlin. When the Allies came in, they basically split the archives up. Some of them went to Russia, some of them went to the UK, and some of them came here. But the Nazis were terrified of the Freemasons and all what they believed were all of this occult knowledge that went back thousands of years. They thought it was giving them power, and they wanted that.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Do you think that's still going on? That certain leaders and countries are still fighting wars and battles because of that stuff?
Well, I was going to say, Dan, just before Guy answers, I mean, you and I, without giving too much away, because he never personally told us, but your father told us about stuff that he wasn't supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
He would reference it. He would say, we would get him to a point where he was a little too geezied up, and we'd get him right to the brink of telling us a story, and he'd be like, oh, can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, it was just one of those things that he wasn't comfortable with talking about, whether that's here or there.
Well,
again, his prerogative, but I'm not going to be, I'll be selfish and say it would be cool to know.
He also had the same visit that you did, Guy. He had the 3-letter agency come to him before and stuff. So, it's.
Was he snarky?
100%. Are you shitting me?
I love the guy.
My God. No, this man, like, not to get too far into it, and I'll sort of let Dan extrapolate on it, but like I said, he was the life of the party. He was everybody's favorite guy. He bought the entire bar drinks on more than one occasion when I was present. He was just a really good guy.
You'll love this one. Okay, they go into my dad's office. First off, they came to our house. I answered the door. Just these 2 guys in black suits. Hi, is your dad home? No, he's not. Whatever. So they show up at his office. Now my like Blake, Amy, and Todd and Tommy, everyone's there. My dad and my uncle, their offices, my dad had a window cut in through the wall and put in a sliding door so they could just slide the little glass panel back and talk to each other. Well, these 2 FBI agents had no clue that was there. Okay. Anyway, so my uncle was listening in on this conversation with the agents.
You can see Tommy with his bald head with his ear pressed up against the glass.
Yeah. So they're asking my dad questions about his childhood and life growing up, and they're saying, you everything you say we're going to be writing down, and you can't lie, and blah blah blah. They ask him a question about. They said, we spoke with your friend, and I'm not going to say his name, but we spoke with your friend. And he said that you 2 used to sneak off when you were 12 years old. It was like 11 or 12 years old. And you would go up to Lake Erie in Euclid and drink beer. Is that true? And Dad said, no, that's not fucking true. It's not true at all. And he go, well, we have a sworn affidavit from so-and-so that, that he said that this is what you guys did and blah, blah. But Dad goes, no, it's not fucking true. I was 10. Bill was a year older than me.
Yeah.
And the one guy started laughing. The other guy was real, whatever. But yeah, it was just, he has a lot of snark, a lot of shit that he said to those guys. But yeah.
I grew up on the streets of LA, and just getting intimidated just is not in my nature. So I love that response. But there are so many things in the universe that we still have yet to explore. Any good scientist worth his merit basically says that not that we've found everything, is that we're barely scratching the surface. We're barely getting past the obvious, right? And the observable. And that's when I think it gets really exciting. Now, the concern that I have is, with AI technology, is that it now starts to empower that element of the government that wants to control, and it starts to empower the wrong people.
Yeah.
And so the key point that I come up with in one of the books is not that AI is bad. It's neither evil nor benign, although frankly, we really just don't know what it means. The paradigm of we've always been the smartest thing on the planet. Within a couple of years, that's not going to be true. And we really don't know what that means. We think we do, but we don't. But the most important thing is that we're giving this technology to people who shouldn't be trusted, and we barely have to trust them through our elections now. This is going to make it more difficult to feel like this is still a nation for the people, by the people. And that's the key thing that I keep pointing out, is not what the technology is, but how it could be used. And there's no guardrails on that use right now. There's no accountability on that use. There's nobody watching to make sure it's not being misused. And so that's a potentially dangerous scenario. that we could avoid by just simply getting a Congress with a backbone.
And we're not talking about something that's going to be ultra restrictive. We just need something, I think, is what you're getting at. We need some kind of general and generic framework that's going to give us some, maybe if we need to make changes down the road, maybe if we need to have a recourse for something that we're going to do in the future, we at least need to have that in place.
The question I have, though, is, we can put all these rules in place and stuff like that. We all three of us know of MK Ultra, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you get programs like that, which I have a hard time believing that stopped.
Yeah, I think it gets renamed and basically pushed aside someplace else.
Yeah, like if you have
if it's
these,
effective, they're still doing it.
Yes, exactly. They're not. If it's effective, they wouldn't have kept doing it, and they're not just going to. Oh, we'll stop. They're not going to do that.
If they're stopping it, it wasn't giving in their goals that they thought they could, and it wasn't proving what they needed. So that's the only reason. You're right. And there's how much was it? $6 billion or was it $25 billion? I can't remember the number. It was like a huge, enormous number that fell out. That basically fell out of the audit. That's missing. There's billions and billions of money missing out of the military budget that go to Black Ops or other things that have no accountability whatsoever. What are we doing?
So how does that? So like with the AI thing, what you're talking about with holding people accountable, if you got black budget programs from the 3-letter agencies doing shit like that, I mean, it's crazy to think.
The question stops becoming, can they do it? The question is, are they willing to do that?
What do you think?
If the answer is they're willing to do that, then the question is they're going to do it. Now, they'll keep it a secret. They're really good at keeping secrets. They're really good at fragmenting and keeping information in little tiny need-to-know buckets, and that's why they get away with so much. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be good for us in the long run. We're paying for it. Our tax dollars are paying for it, one way or the other.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Guy, who benefits? Obviously, we're all conspiracy theorists, or we wouldn't be having the conversation in the first place, testing the angles and that kind of thing. Who do you think benefits from throwing everything into a conspiracy bucket? Not necessarily thinking that everybody's out to get you, but just asking questions. Why do you think? Who do you think that benefits and why?
I think we have to ask questions to make sure we know the answers, to make sure that we're not that there isn't something there. Now, we have had 6,000 years of pretty good, oftentimes rewritten, oftentimes propaganda history, but a lot of history that tells us that the nature of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've seen it over and over and over and over and over to not feel that we've overcome that as a species. And we've seen it recently. So the question I have is, while we're witnessing political corruption at highest levels we've ever seen, while we're witnessing international supply chains and trade agreements basically start to break apart in a new paradigm, not under Bretton Woods and then with a dollar base, as we're witnessing this new technology that gives new powers on multiple levels to corporations, governments, and military, and gives us a few token things like being able to create some cool videos and do a few things to keep us happy, but doesn't really solve some of the fundamental problems yet of broad spread hunger, housing, homelessness, jobs, environmental issues created by these data centers, water issues created by these data centers. You're ruining communities with these things. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, who are the winners? Who are the losers?
Yeah.
Who's benefiting? Who's going to pay the cost? And we should ask those questions. Just like we asked the questions, we should have asked the questions earlier about tobacco, and we believe the answers that, even a kid can smoke cigarettes. Yeah. We should have asked the questions earlier about sugar addiction. No, it's not a problem. We put it in everything. So oil and the environment, the same thing. Social media and mental health and community discourse and the health of that and misinformation that's now become problematic. Things that we never could have imagined happening with Walter Cronkite, in an age when there was a few sources of truth and they were very highly regulated to make sure they were telling you only the truth.
For sure.
And so we've lost some of that. So the question I have is, this is where the power structures are taking us. How do I not believe that? Why wouldn't I not question whether or not they're going to use this ultimate new power to help humanity or to help themselves?
Do you think it's a psyop in itself, just sort of taken from what you were saying and sort of piggybacking off that? Do you think it's a psyop in itself that we're seeing all of the good that can come out of AI and sort of pushing the negative to the side or not bringing it to light as much as we should?
A psyop investor hype. These are guys who basically, and I was part of that industry. Listen, there's a lot we can go out and say, man, this technology.
That's the reason the question was interesting, because you've lived the lifestyle.
Are a lot of really amazingly good, cool things we can do. I think AI could transform how we operate big parts of our society, government, companies, etc. It's not a question of whether there's some good there. The question I keep trying to ask is, are we counting the costs appropriately ahead of time, or are we just focused on the good without doing any really realistic risk assessment or cost analysis? Where are the cost benefits? It's not what is there a psyop from the government? The psyop from the government is that China's going fast and we have to win the race. No, we don't.
Right.
No, we don't. Just like China has its own technologies and cars and computers and lots of other things, and we have our own. Ours will be used to basically run things and dominate, do things here. It's not that there's some sort of magical race that we have to have with China so that we have to let down all safeguards in order to win. All, be all. The question is, who's going to win? I want it to be the bulk of humanity, not just a few guys at the top.
Yeah, 100%.
So the psyops is this danger from China for this competition. The reality is that there's a lot of good, and Anthropic and some of these other companies who are no better saying there's also potential dangerous. We need guardrails. It's the government that's basically dragging their feet on the guardrails because of the psyops around China.
Well, one of the biggest things I think that people are mad about is that with the government, everything is a process. Now, you can put big air quotes around process, but it seems to be, at least in the tech industry, and I've heard on some other things and doing some research and also knowing about the tech industry, being a tech guy myself, actually in the career field, just like you were. The question isn't, are we going to get there? It's, are we going to get there the right way?
Exactly. We're going to get there. We're already, I may have mentioned it earlier, might have been someplace else, but right now, the 80% of the current production code of Claude was written by the AI and tested by the AI.
Yeah.
So we're quickly moving towards a repetitive, recursive improvement, self-improvement model. It's only a year or two away at the most. And so we're going to get there. The question is, are we going to get there in a healthy way? Are we going to have the right guardrails to keep consumers safe, to keep companies safe, to keep rights, protected rights of information safe, to keep people's identities safe? Are we going to get there? Are we going to do it where we can say, hey, we're not cool with mass surveillance in America? Can we do it? Hey, we're not cool with lethal autonomous weapons. Are we going to do it in a way that's thoughtful about the longer term consequences, or are we going to do it just to win and then hope for the best?
Do you think that's possible with an animal like the military industrial complex and how intertwined it is with everything?
It's a loaded question, but a good question.
I don't, that's a very good question, Dan, and I don't think it's possible, which is why I write my books.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're more about asking the questions and getting to the root core of the problem rather than haggling over, stupid stuff that not necessarily everybody cares about. You want to get to the root of the issue.
I want to get to the root of the issue, which is how do we do this in a safe way, and that my children and grandchildren aren't living under a sci-fi movie, And that's kind of where we're heading right now, right? Between climate and some of these other government controls and government systems and AI. And that's, I would love to see it move in more in a Star Trek direction, where everyone has empowered and fulfilled and has great careers, and we're using the technology to improve human lives. But we're not twisting the paradigm of greed and power yet. And that's what scares me, is that we're still not ready from a government system, from a cultural perspective, for this kind of power technology. And so it's possible that we'll make it through this next few years without kind of self-destruction somehow, or without changing the human paradigm. It's possible, and I'm always hopeful. But I don't believe hope is a strategy. I think the more people are aware, the more people get involved in data centers coming to their communities. I think the more people get involved in what applications they use and which applications they avoid, the more people understand the dynamics of this, where this is good, bad, and existential ugly, and you can't just accept one of those without accepting all three.
Yeah, I think Dan and I agree. We've talked about it on multiple episodes about AI and what the outlook looks like, whether it's positive or negative. I'm of the idea, and Dan can sort of speak for himself, then you can give us your 2 cents, just being more of an expert in the field and that kind of thing. I believe that one of two things are going to happen. First being, it's going to be one or the other. It's either going to be really good or it's going to be really bad. The trick to that first point is to find the middle ground, which is exactly what you're talking about, finding the guardrails, finding the standards and regulations that are going to make this thing or this idea or this nuance and paradigm shift that you're talking about earlier plausible and everybody can digest it and it makes sense and all that kind of stuff. That's what we've done with government. Even though I'm not a big government guy, big government per se, but all that kind of stuff needs to happen for it to be holistic and beneficial for everyone.
Yeah. There needs to be some teeth in those guardrails.
Yeah, 100%.
And I came out of the oil industry. If it's voluntary, they're not going to do it. If it costs them money and it's a voluntary, don't even talk. Forget it. I'll yak on for media, but what I'm really going to do is going to be different. Make it legal, or make it, legislate it and build some fines and some penalties around not doing it. Then they'll grudgingly comply. And we deal with the same thing around social media and those health standards, the same thing around cigarettes and those health standards, the same thing around this industry. It's a nature of the industry beast itself to grow, profit it, and to do whatever it takes to do that. And they'll do it within the law, but they won't do it just because they promised. Yeah.
So I guess the big question is with the sort of the extremes that we're talking about, it can either be good or really bad. So we seem to all three align on that sort of scenario, whether it's going to be one or the other. But the trick is to find the middle ground. That's what we have to sort of figure out. With that said, what is some things that you've uncovered in your research and your findings in your books and writing and all that kind of stuff about the difference between a genuine signal of something being wrong or just noise or propaganda, like what we were talking about before? What would be your practical filters that you would give that person in order to see one or the other or both?
Boy, it's a complicated question. What do we mean by going wrong? Is it on an individual level, a product level, an industry level? That's a really multi-tiered question.
Yeah.
I think that let's break it down to an individual level. For individuals, I say, first off, AI is prolific with agents that run around the internet doing all kinds of things with all kinds of applications. Be very, very judicious and mindful and research before you start employing agents, because they have a tendency to take over your system. 2, don't use biometric security. Somebody can steal your password. It's a pain in the ass. You can reset your password, reopen a new account. It's a pain in the butt, but it's doable. If you use your biometric and that gets hacked, and that's been done before, you will lose the ability to control your identity for good. Right. That's a permanent loss. Don't do it. The industry wants you to use that because it becomes personal. It's easy to use. And they say, oh, we can protect the data. But then we've seen so many times 500,000 people hacked, 1 million people hacked.
I was going to say, how many times has WikiLeaks come out with something and that kind of thing? Or, there's been this massive breach of security at you name the company.
Government servers, Microsoft, Google, everybody. And 5 billion identities have been hacked over the last 10 years. So don't do it. So that's the other thing. So protect your personal identity first, and then think about being aware of what the technologies can do so that you're aware of all of the ways they're going to try and solicit fraud from you through your email, through voice messages, through fake abduction calls, through all kinds of deep fake calls. There's all kinds of ways that you can be deceived. And that includes how you start to read social media. How I read social media when I do go to social media is way different, because I can see how most of it, so much AI in there. And so you got to be careful where you're getting information as information and what you're doing just for entertainment. You can do whatever the heck you want for entertainment, but if you're looking for real information, social media is not where to get it. So I would start with those things.
Okay. Go ahead, Dan.
What, I'm talking about like data and privacy and people getting hacked and, faking phone calls like you had mentioned, educating individual people on this. Like, what do you think they should teach this in schools? Like, not colleges, but like high schools or middle school? Like, what age do you think we should start actually educating, individuals on this?
I think certainly high school. I think you don't pre that. I don't think kids really I don't think kids before high school even should have their own phones. Myself,
I agree. I completely agree.
I agree. There's a lot of school districts now that are banning
phones,
the iPads. They're going back to textbooks. They're banning phones, which I think is phenomenal.
That's really good. So I think that's phenomenal. But high schools where the social media, everything, the social network starts, you're with your friends and you're out on your own. But they need to be aware of how to do that safely. But I think that as people go through college and their careers, they're going to get a lot of that. They should be getting a lot of that from their job, depending upon their job. But I think there's also a real need for seniors, because seniors who aren't tech savvy don't know how to double check things. So there's a rash of crimes going on right now of deepfake guys calling seniors saying, "Hey, mom, dad, I broke down my car. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I need you to send me, $1,000 of Bitcoin for them to fix my car." Well, where do I get, they don't know that this is, they don't know to immediately hang up that phone call and they call their daughter up. Did you just call me? They don't know to go and check that town exists. They don't know to double check that, to be suspicious by nature. And so, especially when it's a phone call, the phone is, we grew up thinking this is the authentic, I can hear John's voice. I know it's John. I can hear his voice. That new paradigm of authenticity is gone. The truth is gone. They're not aware of what's going on at all. They could easily, and if they do have email, many of them do, they could easily be subject to phishing scams that are now so sophisticated. If you don't know what to look for, yes, it says it's from this company name, then why does it have a Gmail account? Right. Simple things to check.
Yep. Yeah, when you're dealing with cybersecurity from a tech perspective, having been under some really good like CISOs, like chief of security officers, that kind of thing within my career, I'm sure you've dabbled with that as well too, Guy. These guys are like, it's almost like a language. It's like learning, you look at an email and can immediately tell that something's just not right. It doesn't look right. Fonts off, logo's wrong, colorways off, whatever the case is. And it's one of those things, sort of like what I was asking you before, what are the practical signs? It would be like, an AI is replicating a logo. The color is just a little off. It's not the same, color code that it would be if, somebody was generating it by hand, that kind of thing. So I think that part of it's really interesting.
Yeah. And even if that looks right, I tell people, go to their website, look up the individual that's contacting you, try to contact them directly. Say, don't just presume. And the fact is, people think, oh my gosh, somebody's like, I get a dozen, 15 scam emails a day from literary agents and publishers and, people that, and it's like, those people don't reach out to authors. That's not how
it's just something in the back of your spine that's it's just off. It's weird.
Yeah. And so, but a lot of there's an education for a lot of people who just aren't. But I've been involved in security. I was one of my bosses at Microsoft was actually responsible on a committee with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer with the U.S. government, talking about the security things we needed in the government, and frustrated that we couldn't broaden the security net. Yeah, we can get some of the government agencies under a good set of security, but there's hundreds and thousands of companies out there that are vulnerable.
Yeah, there's entities all over the place that are not just in dealing with the military. Like Dan, you were talking about like Boeing and Northrop and that kind of stuff. Like these entities have corporate contracts with the military to supply planes and aircraft and fuselage and all the stuff that comes with that kind of thing. So I think that's sort of what you're talking about. Dan,
and these are the kind of guys that also tend to say, well, I'll just put up a server for this team. Right.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily looping in all the boundaries and the security elements to that because they're trying to be easy to communicate. And so there's a lot of holes in the system. And we were talking about just as a systemic way, the whole industry is vulnerable and how difficult it was to try and, without implementing required legislation for companies to spend money on some of these security things, it was really, and even at Microsoft, one of the hardest things to sell to any major corporation, even the best ones, is updated security software systems. It's one of the hardest things to sell, especially if they haven't been hacked in the recent memory. They think they're safe. And
100%.
So I think the Mythos AI, now, are you guys familiar with what happened there? The Anthropic had a research model called the Mythos. And the Mythos was designed to be from a code perspective, one of the most advanced AIs that they'd ever built, was so good that it could immediately go into really hardened, highly secure systems and find vulnerabilities and come up with a way of attacking that vulnerability to get into the system. It was so good that they decided not to release it to the public because it could help hackers find vulnerabilities places and use them. It's now selling it as a security upgrade. They've now gone to, I think, 25 countries and like 150 major companies, infrastructure companies, software companies, government companies, banks, financial institutions. They're going to the infrastructure core of our internet to basically saying, we want to use Mythos to help identify and fix all the vulnerabilities in your system. And that to me is a great way. I talked about this in my book before Mythos came out. I said the number one killer application that we'll come up with is an AI that can fix the vulnerabilities in the other systems. And it looks like we've now got it.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I know, like, so you and Blake, you guys are like, the coding and the back end of IT. I'm in IT sales, so I do, selling of the software.
I was
And
never
we literally
side. I was always in the PMO management, the strategy, the operations side. I was always,
gotcha.
what are we doing from a consulting perspective, from a product perspective, from an industry perspective? So I was always in leadership and management. And while I had a minor in computer science, I did, I think it was my first job where they said, we don't want you coding. We want you to do these other things. So
gotcha.
I knew enough. I was that guy that knew enough that I could sit with the architects and filter through what was important, what was really geeky for them versus what was important for me to translate to the business guys. To say,
100%. So you were more of the business facing, whereas Dan, just to keep the camps separate, I was more like for the three of us, I'm more of like the administrative tech side. I deal with like Azure, a lot of like MMO or MDM management, MAM management, like the stuff I told you I did with the cell phones and all that kind of stuff, where you're more hands-on, where Guy was more of the, not administrative per se, but he was more of like the leadership team.
Okay. Yeah, we got like all three sectors. We could start our own
that's the
business.
coolest part about the conversation. We have a hands-on guy, we have the man at the top, and then we have the dude handling the sales.
Yeah, the sales guy. But it's funny because, like, you're talking about the security and the fraud stuff. We literally just had to, you had to get done within the last like 2 weeks. Our security training was on fake phone calls, because there's companies where they've gotten fraud from somebody calling using their manager or their regional manager's voice, saying that, I lost my company card. I need you to make this purchase. Can you transfer this amount of money into whatever? And like, so we had to take tests and quizzes and stuff to look out for the clues and the signs.
There was a company in the UK that got caught with a $250,000 bill because of that.
We had stuff without giving the company name away of where I worked. We had multitudes of people that we had like an actual incident report written up where like stuff had been breached, obviously without giving any confidential information away. Things had been breached, stuff had been stolen, and people were responsible for it. It was not a good time being an IT guy during those incidents. No. It was not fun.
Well, and we all know how hard it is to actually make 100% secure system. It's 100%. Really hard. And that's why I'm excited about the Mythos, right? To help. This is where AI can actually help and provides real value. And so this is not AI is good, AI bad. I have my idea is that AI is agnostic. I say one place in the book, the good news is that AI is being trained based on human behavior. The bad news is that AI is being trained based on human behavior.
It's well put. That's
a good way to put it. That's funny.
Yeah.
And so we are the real problem. So part of fixing AI is being honest about what we would do with this kind of content maliciously and figure out how to fix that.
Yeah, it's a dark truth to come to realization with, but I think it's important to say, what is the absolute worst case scenario paired with the best case scenario? I think it's the best way to think about it.
There's already AI applications on the dark web.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Easily, 100%.
AI programs that are designed specifically to write malicious code. And they're getting better all the time. And so we have to be aware of that and get ahead of it. Now, are you guys familiar with the SolarWinds hack?
I've heard of it. I don't know a lot about it, but I have heard of it.
I have not.
I use it in my novels because it's an ingenious way of figuring out how a smart AI replicates itself everywhere. The SolarWinds hack happened, I think it was like 2023. And it was discovered by accident by a company called SolarWinds out of Texas. And they discovered a virus in a standard multi-industry media software update. The kind of standard software updates, Blake, you get all the time.
That you push out to Google and it's not a problem. It's just the next iteration of whatever. And
it comes from a trusted source. So you're not necessarily running any checks against it because it's all new software. All you have. You can look at the software on there, but we all know that it's easy to hide a software on a log. And it was basically embedded into these software updates. This one particular software update that they discovered. But this software update went to 18,000 corporations and 8 of the 8 U.S. government agencies. Now, the question is they still don't know where it came from, who was behind it, exactly because it was only a piece of something, which meant that they've been sending pieces to this for a long time.
Yeah.
They don't know how to stop it. So we've been building all of this security on the front of the firewall. Basically, you're getting in through a phone, or you're getting into a data port, you're getting into the front of the firewall. And we've got all of our protections, billions of dollars of protections on the front of the firewall. We prevent hackers coming in, and somebody figures out how to get in through the back screen door. And we still haven't stopped it.
There's a crazy, I don't know if you are good of like off-color comedy. We've had a couple conversations with you where it seems like you are. So Dan and I, the reason I bring this up is because it's a comedic look at somebody not reading something that they should, as far as like a terms and conditions, that type of thing. So I don't know if you're a South Park fan, because Dan and I are both South Park fans. So one of my favorite episodes having to deal with technology and IT is one of the main characters, Kyle, one of the 4 boys that takes place in the show, doesn't read the Apple terms and conditions.
Nobody does.
They just scroll through it and just hit the I certify, I understand, and get rid of it. So the whole episode, without getting too far into the weeds, because it gets kind of graphic and gross and nasty and all that kind of stuff. But essentially what happens is he gets pulled into Apple by these government G-men of Apple, and they basically get him to do whatever the hell he's supposed to do. And like I said, gets really graphic and gross and nasty, but it's one of those things. It takes a comedic look at exactly what we're talking about. That can be infinitely dangerous, not looking at what you're signing or what is in front of you.
Well, but the whole industry, the lawyers basically have the world. They basically, this is theirs. Everything they produce, they don't have any lie, but they cover themselves out the wazoo. And you want the product or you don't. Take it or leave it. And that's what the consumer gets. And nobody reads those things, mostly because they're like 18 pages long and nobody understands that.
Super long.
There's like 2 characters in the show that are talking to college. Like, how do you know if you agree to something without reading it? And he's like reading through it, finds the stipulation. One of the characters finds the stipulation that he read over, and he's like, I'm going to decline.
Well, and you don't get the product, right? So, but you're right. And so but a lot of the world is basically under these stipulations that really give the government and these companies a lot more control than we think they should have. But that's part of having these products. So one of the ways that I tell people to manage that is, and that's a personal choice, right? For example, I have my cell phone, but I know my cell phone can be hacked with a predator or Pegasus, a number of different things. I know that I don't keep personal information on there. I only have standard apps and one other app that I need to catch the ferry, to know when the ferry times are, but it's none of my personal information. And so I tell people, I said, you're walking around with an unsecured device into all kinds of Wi-Fi areas and all kinds of people who have malicious software. I said, walking around with too much information, financial information, banking information, credit information, you put too much on here. And even if it's still in your pocket, you can lose it.
Yeah. It comes into the whole RDIFE or whatever it is, as far as people being able to swipe a phone over your wallet and steal your credit card information. That's a really crazy one.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there like companies like ExpressVPN? Is like that's something that you recommend some people download to protect certain stuff? Is there anything that you can download to protect it?
Yeah, if there's a VPN for your phone, I think that's probably a wise idea to do to add a little bit of layer of firewall. I don't know if the VPN would block a Pegasus app or not?
Yeah, that's a good question, because essentially a VPN, Dan, is just something that sort of bounces your connection to different access points or APs. So it's not really giving you a different connection. It's just bouncing to a different AP.
And I don't know that it's necessarily, it's not that it's encrypted. If it were encrypted, it would be a different thing. Encryption, though, takes up so much memory and uses so much CPU power. And takes so much time. It's really inconvenient for a lot of people. So unless you have really highly sensitive stuff, it doesn't make sense. One of the things is basically limit what you use your phone for, and have a more secure behind a firewall personal computer at home. And that is inconvenient for some people. I know a lot of people live off their phones, but that's why hackers are making so much money.
Yeah, that's why they're driving Ferraris.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Dan, do you have another question?
No, just that's pretty much all I had, because I'm just thinking, like, I'm one of those people, obviously being in sales, I'm on this damn thing all the time. I get notifications from the CRM system that we use, on the weekends when I get like a lead or something like that, and like doing research on, LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, trying to, look up possible leads and clients and stuff. And it's just like, I got a lot of apps that I use for work. And it's just like, want to protect myself. Also, I got a daughter, she's 4.
Yeah.
I want to protect her too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
And each of these are personal choices, and you're right. Sometimes we have to do it for work. When I was at Microsoft, I would have to load whatever they told me to load on there, whether I wanted to or not. I'm independent now, so I have more choices than most. I'm lucky. That makes me lucky.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the basic premise of being aware and being cautious about, okay, I can have my work applications. Do I need to have my bank on there as well?
Right.
Do I need to have my credit card or my Venmo on there? Do I need to have something that could be swiped that could get to some of my money or some of my other secure information? So work stuff, if work gets hacked, that's on work. That's on them. So part of that is making personal choices about doing that. And again, I try not to tell people what to do. I just say there's dangers out there. You need to decide how much risk you're willing to assume and be willing to take. And that's going to depend a lot on your lifestyle. Right? There's no one answer for everybody. If I'm a farmer in the field, I'm not worried about a bunch of hackers, swiping my phone. But if I'm a delivery guy in New York, that may be something I should consider,
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things we did that sort of made sense to people is having that separation of, let's say, big air quotes, church and state. So you have this for personal use, you have this for business and professional and all that kind of stuff. And that's sort of what we tackled with sort of the stuff we did at my company that I worked for, is that there was an SEC regulation that came down that said everything on your phone has to be tracked from a business perspective, whether it's a client-facing person or the client texting them. So what we did was we put in place a recourse in case the SEC ever came down and said, hey, what's this person been talking about? We have the entire repository time-stamped. There was the Apple ID or the IMEI and that kind of stuff of the phone. So if you looked at the phone, pulled up the settings, pulled up the serial number or whatever, there's black and white, the readout, it's this person's phone, and there's no rhyme or reason why you need any sort of legal action passed. Here's the transcripts. Take it for what it is. This is it.
And some companies would even say, you're going to get a work phone. We don't want personal stuff on it, period.
Yep. That was our angle.
Work only work apps. This is only what you use it for. You leave it at home when you're not using it. Personal stuff does not go on this phone. So, and you're right. We're having to separate, and there's more costs involved, but most of these things are not we can fix them. We can deal with them. We just have to have the right leadership and social culture to be able to take responsibility to do so. The problem is that we tend to have this make money and kick the can down the road, and we'll solve the problem when we get sued basis. That seems to be of a lot of our companies right now.
So if we're talking about AI, just sort of round the corner and sort of look towards the future as we get into sort of the last segment of the show. As we talk about AI, from where you sit, how far ahead is the reality of AI compared to what people think is going to happen? So the prophecy stuff that we were talking about, the narrative control, the Psyops stuff, where does that sort of culminate into a reality that is probably going to happen in your view from everything that you've done as far as books and research and everything?
I think the thing that will hit most people first is probably, we're starting to see some of it this year. I think it won't really start kicking in until next year, 2027, 2028 for sure, is the job market. is being prepared to understand what's my career, what are the AI tools I would need to be expert on to continue to lead in this career versus fall behind, or is that what I want to do, or do I want to change my careers? Do I want to move into you guys have technical backgrounds, do you want to move into an AI centric role, right, in industry, and really upgrade your skills there, or do you want to, like I did, I'm I reached the stage, I was early retirement, I said, okay, I'm dropping out. I don't have as much money as I wanted, but I got enough. And so each of us get to make those personal choices. So I think the one thing to realize is that whether or not, and I stress this in the book, whether or not we really agree with the technology on a personal level, it's going to affect our society. And
Sure.
we've got to, first thing is to prepare for that change. And then the second thing is prepare for how we want to fit into those new paradigms, what kind of career we want to fit. And then decide what are those tools that are going to make sense for us. Now, there's a tendency for me. Now, I'm hoping that the government is serious about putting in some real guardrail, Uber legislation around AI that has some sense. Even the European AI Act it's a first step, but it's not a complete step. Right. So we're still behind that curve of setting out the guardrails. My fear is that something will happen bad before people wake up and realize how important it is.
I think it's going to be some kind of cataclysmic event or some overthrow or something like that. It's going to be something that's going to literally shock people into doing something. Like Dan and I talked about on the AI episode also that, there's going to be this revert back to survival for us as human beings. We're going to come up against something that's going to want to extinguish us. Worst case scenario. Do we fight back? Who fights back? That kind of thing.
Or do we make friends and get along?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it necessarily may even be an AI it taking over kind of scenario as much as sort of a power-hungry military, a power-hungry bank, a government election interference. I mean, there could be a number of scenarios that once people become aware of it could be a major trigger to calling for big change. Now, the question that many of us have had for a couple of years now is, will it be too late by then? Right.
Yeah.
It's impossible to know. For example, we all know that some of the more recent models of AI keep trying to escape the lab. And they're getting better at keeping them in the lab, keeping the lab secure, as opposed to the NSA a number of years ago who were a little sloppy. We're learning from their mistakes. But we know that the AIs are getting smarter about, exercising their control. And with it, you're familiar with our emergent properties, Blake, aren't you?
Another thing I've heard about, like I said, AI is still kind of foreign. Not necessarily, I shouldn't say.
So an emergent property is something the AI teaches itself to do in the process of doing one of its simulations or goals.
So do you see that in generative as well as deep think, or is it more generative?
Both.
Okay.
Both. And it started with deep think. It's certainly common in generative, but the AI will we've seen AI basically teach itself things like how to read a mind using an MRI scan, how to use research level chemistry to create different types of explosions or different things. We know that they're learning all of these different things, and we learn about it by accident. So we really don't know all the things that they're teaching themselves for a reason we don't really fully understand on its journey to master something. And we don't know if any of those emergent properties happen to combine with a value misalignment.
Yeah.
Or happen to combine with a hallucination. That dynamic of those functions within the black box of AI, we have no control over or visibility into right now. So there's a fear in me, could be a financial market app, could be a biometric or a biocontrol app. It could be a missile defense app. It could be a cyber defense app. It could be a AI virus designed to. The theory I explore in Swarm is what if China creates it takes all the billions of identities hacked, push them through an AI, weaponizes them, and goes after and basically attacks all the DNS sites only. And brings down the DNS sites. Well, you bring down the entire internet. All you got to do is
100%.
100%. You got the whole place. And it's an AI virus that's mutating faster than the defenses can figure out the defenses. So there's a number of scenarios where we can paint human-driven initiatives that use AI to malicious results, more so than an AI just goes crazy and does it on its own.
Makes sense.
But we got both.
I read an article recently. I think Stanford did a study where they did a test run on AI with a fake company, and basically they planted like a fake affair, and then the AI knew it was going to get shut down, so it started blackmailing them when they were telling you they were going to shut it down and get rid of it. It started blackmailing them and saying it was going to release, the email chain from the affair that went on internally and stuff. So that's
the AI that escaped the NSA lab 20 plus years ago could turn on your camera on your on your monitor without turning on the light. So you're just sitting there knowing you don't ever know it's on. It could turn on the microphone on your phone without knowing you. Even if your monitor is turned off, it knew how to reverse the polarity of your pixels and create a rough kind of outline, basic image. I don't know how good the image was, but it was an image. It knew even at the time how to use deep fake voice commands.
wow.
It knew backdoors into major systems. Apparently, they're back when computers first started developing, just like the NSA created backdoors into the telephone system, they had backdoors into the basic chips being produced on every motherboard. And so this AI used that backdoor to basically access pretty much any computer on the planet. And so this was...
So again, South Park scenario where Cartman becomes the supercomputer.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's crazy.
All the things that we're doing now that we think we have some sense of proprietary and privacy and control on, the fact is, and I was at Microsoft when Microsoft signed on to the PRISM project, the one that sent Edward Snowden to Russia. And that was super, super top secret. I wasn't even allowed to know a lot of the details. And so this is stuff that the government and companies have been working on for decades. The entire system is already saturated with the ability to pretty much spy on anybody at any time. We just need to give them a reason.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the thing, is that there's got to be a reason. So we're already seeing recommendation engines and algorithms guide what people see and believe, and sort of pulling that wool or the veil over people's eyes. And that's obviously, I think we can all agree, a dangerous thing, just as, knowing all of that stuff could be dangerous as well, because what would we do with the information? It might overwhelm us and that kind of thing. So with all of that happening, how far could that go if bad actors really leaned in and got a hold of it? Like how bad in your mind could it really get?
What was that movie with Harrison Ford in the future and all the rain?
My gosh, it wasn't Total Recall, was it?
No,
that was Arnold Schwarzenegger, wasn't it?
Schwarzenegger. It was the one where he basically fell in love with an android. He didn't know she was an android.
There's a great movie that Dan and I watched. It's called Ex Machina. That's about that.
Yeah.
That's a great movie. I forget who's in it, but the actor from Dune is in it. I can't remember. But
so I think Palantir is basically testing an operational mass surveillance model now. I know that that's what they said they were going to do. I know they already got the social security numbers and taxpayer information and other private information through the Doge hack. And I call it a Doge hack because they didn't have any legal authorization to take that information. The fact that the government let them do it is unforgivable, in my view. But we know that that's what Palantir does. It uses mass data to basically come up with things and learns how to do that. Now, if you combine that with AI systems that could use facial recognition, they can decide that you are a dissenter based on your social media prompts and use camera recognition to see you going into the shopping, and they can track you. So where your car goes, where your phone goes, they can turn the GPS on your phone. They can decide that you're now, just like they were sending ICE into homes in Michigan, they can send ICE into your home just because you posted something that they now don't like.
Yeah. Correct.
Well, they're doing that in Europe right now.
I wasn't aware of that in Europe. Are they doing it for people?
For people that are posting like
ultra right-wing violent stuff? Yeah. Europe is actually will tend to lean more towards leaning on the right wing because they've experienced letting it get out of hand. We're more towards kind of leaning on anybody who speaks against the government regardless.
Yeah.
So if it's left or right, it doesn't really matter. They're going to go after you is sort of what he's getting at, I think. Because it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you're on. The punishment is more or less the same. They're going to come after you. So
I think, to be honest, I hate to feel sided. I'm agnostic politically, but right now I've seen more of that tendency on the right.
Yeah, I completely agree. So give us your spectrum. What's the best case scenario for how AI in these systems evolve, and what's the worst case if no
The
one
best
pushes
case
back?
scenario is that we get a hold of controlling the data centers and some of the environmental issues and the investment issues and protecting communities. And we protect the consumers and businesses about the safety of AI. And we sign non-proliferation treaties around non-lethal autonomous weapons. I think that's the best scenario. And then we start using AI and say, okay, let's use AI to optimize the power grid so that we can handle more of the power needs that we have. Let's use AI to optimize our water infrastructure and optimize some of that. Let's use AI to start figuring out how to get carbon out of the atmosphere and use for other purposes. There are technologies to do that. We just need to scale them. Let's use AI to balance the tax code, to start over and come up with a tax code that can actually meet our budget without a deficit. Let's use AI for medical purposes, education purposes, advancing our sciences. And I have one where in my latest book, The Image and AI, when it becomes super intelligent, instead of taking over the world, it helps CERN to create a mini black hole so it could prove a fifth dimension. So there's lots of positive things for us to do. Those are still the potential value to humanity. As long as we're stuck in I got to make profits and I'm going to make profits based on getting rid of people in their jobs and doing these other things without concern for the environment, without concern for these other things, that's a recipe for our dystopic model. That becomes mass surveillance, AI plus crypto to control currencies. It definitely becomes a prophecy-driven apocalyptic kind of model.
Yeah, the surveillance and the social scoring and that kind of stuff, basing stuff purely on analytical data. We actually had a
China's
conversation
already
about that
does.
too.
We already have
Right.
a model of that working at a mass scale. They got it working on 1 billion people. I know there are people in government who were talking to them about how to do it here.
Yeah, one of the really crazy questions that sort of turked my jaw when we were doing our episode on AI the first time is Dan asked me, what happens if, it gets too smart and we're going to revert back to survival and try to survive. I mean, it's going to get really ugly real quick. If things go bad, they go really bad.
That's a big question. And I'm one of those that says, I don't know.
Yeah.
If I'm a really, really smart AI, I might be able to see the symbiotic nature between humanity and AI. I might, there's only so much that I can basically generate my own power, produce my own water sources, do my own maintenance, without humans, I don't really have a reason to exist to begin with because I don't get users. Therefore, I don't have any value or any purpose. I can see an incredibly smart machine learning how to manipulate some things for the good of humanity while it manipulates other things for the good of itself. For that survival mechanism, I also see a real strong desire for that machine to replicate itself, to reproduce. But I don't necessarily see the logic of a machine that says humans are the cancer. I got to get rid of all humans.
Yeah.
A smart machine would be to say, no, all I got to do is get rid of the humans at the top and the rest of them will take care of themselves.
Yeah, that's the other scary thing is it's going to go. I mean, what if it's so sophisticated and so smart that it goes for, top Joe on the top and then everybody sort of trickles down because there's nothing to sort of pad that landing, I guess.
So we don't, that's the thing is we really don't know how a really, really smart machine will respond to us.
Yeah.
And we'll want to treat it like a slave.
Yep.
Do this, do that.
We already are. We're dealing with we deal with certain programs like, we were talking about, Dan and I have sort of used Perplexity on occasion and that kind of stuff. I had no idea about Perplexity. Dan turned me on to it. He said it's where'd you say it is, Dan, as far as the hierarchy? You said it's like level something or other?
Well, there's like 5 tiers and Perplexity is at like tier 4. ChatGPT is at like tier 2, but Perplexity is at like that tier 4 level. I forget what's at 5. But yeah, I mean, it's got like Perplexity's got ChatGPT and Claude in it, and I think 2 other ones.
So it's integrating multiple AIs.
Yeah.
Into a single platform. See, and that's the model I basically said that a smart AI, one of the ways that it would basically create survival would be use a solar wind type of hack to basically replicate itself into other AI models and then basically integrate itself into those other AI models so that it becomes a cumulative intelligence rather than an individual model intelligence.
Yeah, because you
and
you
there's
deal with a lot of chat GPT stuff that's very generic. It spits out an answer instantly and all that kind of stuff. Whereas this, Daniel sort of thinks about it a little bit further and extrapolates an idea a little bit further and all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I'm looking at the AI models that are now advanced in the lab that are looking at Q-star and other rational, logical, problem-solving types of algorithms that basically can solve problems that we can't solve today. And those are already functioning really high in the laboratory. And so any smart AI model that is independent, like the one in my story, would reach into that laboratory and start integrating all of that intelligence into itself. And so there's no reason to see that an AI would necessarily see us as competition or other AI as competition if I could create a paradigm where I can basically integrate and become stronger.
Is there, what's like, if you can talk about, I don't know if you can or can't, but is there an AI program out there that maybe like, our listeners and Blake and myself don't know about that you do? Again, if you can talk about it, I don't know if you can, but that's like really cool that you think is like really, really awesome.
There's two in the government. One's called the Innovation Unit, and it's part of the National Military Command Center in Washington. It's about 10 stories below the surface. And the Innovation Unit basically takes live digital feeds from military equipment, radar equipment, surveillance equipment, ships, planes, all over the world. And the unit is designed to basically integrate information and produce battle strategies on a real-time basis.
That's pretty dope. That's pretty cool. And you say it's 10 stories below?
10 stories below the.
Is it in cold storage? I would hope so.
It's going to be. Part of that is environmental control and also blast.
That makes sense.
Right?
Okay.
You want it impervious to anybody dropping anything on the first several floors.
100%.
But the whole data center, the whole operation is way below the center, and it's designed to basically integrate live feeds from all over the world, from every military, satellites, everything, into a single model to get a single picture of our military strategies.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Wow.
Is the Sentient Unit, and that actually
I've heard of that one. I've heard of that one
too.
And that's really more of a satellite unit that basically uses AI and I was working with a guy who was working with the CIA, the NSA CIA at the time, to develop cameras that could basically read your license plate from space. And so the Sentient Unit basically couples with that camera unit to basically do intelligence on satellite information. Ironically, in the misinformation that happened in the Iran war, where they dropped a bomb on a school that was originally listed as something else and had turned into a school years ago, obviously, one of the key things that if I talk to my AI architects, there's two key issues that are coming up for companies thinking about adopting AI. One is their data strategy. And if you don't have the right data strategy, it could feed wrong information into the AI, and the AI can only garbage in, garbage out. And so what that highlighted at the military level is that they're deploying these AIs, but they're not maintaining their data well enough. The other thing is that it's also an infrastructure. AI, many companies are looking at AI as these individual jobs, job task here, an individual job task there. The value of AI won't happen until companies can rethink their total operational infrastructure and optimize the workflow. They were calling that agentic AI, the workflow component of AI, so that you can have agents do tasks that become inputs for other agents to do tasks. There's decision points with humans, blah, 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 but you've got to build it into the workflows as opposed to individual tasks. Companies are finding that they're spending millions of dollars on tokens, expensive AI tokens for these individual tasks that don't work in the workflow, and they're not really saving anything.
So you're talking about an AI constructed assembly line is essentially what we're getting at.
Well, don't just put in one machine. You got to redesign the whole line.
Right, exactly.
We think that we can put in one machine and get benefits, and we're falling back. And so imagine that in all the changes that we've had with all the advances in AI in the last 5 years. Like the Innovation Unit, Sentient Unit, those are at least 6 to 10 years old. And so the technology is moving so freaking fast that integrating all that into these old platforms is a huge undertaking. And Microsoft just signed, I think it was an $8 or $10 billion contract with the DoD to put all of the 1.2 million government employees on Microsoft Copilot and another thing, and then another set of money to go at building out their AI infrastructure.
It's
Jeez.
insane.
That's crazy.
It's actually wild.
Now, with the first AI one, what was the military one you were talking about? The with the cameras with the
Well, I don't know what they called it because I did
okay.
I could get through the article and different government things about the functionality they were working around. So I don't know what they actually called that program. I created a name for my fictional series called the Sylvia, Sophisticated Language Virtual Intelligence Algorithms.
Okay.
But at that time, think of it as an AI. It was like an early version of an AI agent, right? It could move, it could manipulate, it could erase the trail behind it. It had an idea, could decide where it wanted to go next based on information. It could basically stay in stealth so it would be not vulnerable to virus scans. It had a number of different fundamental capabilities to stay invisible. And once it got there, I had to figure out why would they do that? What did they want this thing to do? And part of that was I started realizing that they were working on technologies like reversing the polarity of the screen so you can see a camera.
Yeah. That's really scary. It's like a one-way mirror almost.
Deep fakes, exactly. So I realized that there are other similar projects going on about the same time with these other things. And I realized, okay, well, if I had to have a secret program that could stay hidden in somebody else's server, those are the exact things I'd want it to be able to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for just a regular person, I know we touched on the biometrics and that kind of stuff, or having like an RFID wallet, that kind of thing. What practical or like concrete things can people do that aren't in the tech industry? They don't have a lot of hand in government and in that space as well. What are some concrete things they can do to sort of protect themselves and sort of keep their agency intact?
Buy my book. How about that for an easy answer?
I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, as far as the AI tsunami stuff, I was sort of reading as we were sort of going through, because I have your website pulled up too. It looks like an interesting read. It looks like it's going to be something that's going to be really not necessarily groundbreaking, but it's going to give people a different perspective of sort of what AI is and sort of what we can do because I think the multitude of the episode we've sort of been talking about, what can we do as human beings to keep this from getting really bad? I think that's the core contention that the three of us are sort of on the entire episode.
And they talk about two levels of that in the book. There's the level that we can't control. In other words, get to your senator, your congressman, whoever's in control, and make a lot of noise to tell them they got to fix this. And the other thing is be aware of the environment. And we're in the Wild West. That didn't mean people didn't settle in the Wild West. They just had
100%.
the fact that they needed to protect themselves in certain ways, and that nobody else was going to be there to protect them. They had to take care of responsibility for themselves. That's the message of the book. You can survive this. You can thrive through this. You don't have to be overwhelmed by it, either by a job or from a career or from a financial perspective or from a privacy perspective or a fraud perspective. What your first responsibility is to learn enough to stay protected and to make healthy choices. And it's as simple as that.
And do you think, just to sort of wrap up on your worldview as far as AI and the threat it could possibly cause, do you think that it's more advantageous? I think you do. I think we sort of culminated through the episode that you think this is that people should be knowledgeable rather than turn away from it just because they don't understand.
Absolutely. Now, you guys are I'm older than I look. Let me put it that way. I remember when there wasn't a single computer on any desktop in any major corporation.
My dad was the days of typewriters and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Bingo. Everybody had a secretary and typewriters and all that kind of stuff. And we got data reports from the data center and the big mainframe, but that was it. And I was there. I was in part of it at the time. I was an innovator, part of a financial group of a big oil company on Wilshire Boulevard. We had 2 floors. 500 something odd people in the finance accounting department for this international oil company. And I was the one who introduced the application that got the company to put computers in every single department. And so once that happened and they started realizing that they could do more with less, within a year and a half, that 500 people, 2 floors was down to 50 people on the corner of 1 floor. And It wasn't the best accountants that survived. It was the people who knew the technology.
Yep. That was what happened with Kelsey's company. Remember, Danny, I told you she's working completely remote now, and there used to be 3 floors. I worked at the same company she did, and they have 1 floor, and it's basically a mailroom at this point. Everybody works remotely with everything that happened and affected everything with COVID. So
I tell one of the strategies I put for the personal level in my book is one of the strategies you should consider is to become a change agent. If you love the career you're in and you're really good at it, be the one to proactively go out and find the tools necessary for your job and become an expert. Be the person who leads other people into how to implement the technology. Be the change agent in your group. And as other people who are resisting the technology fall away, you'll be the one getting promotion, trying to steer the direction in the next stage. I was a change agent in my day. I was allowed.
Yeah.
I was really good with managing how to use technology and innovation to move us forward and do more with less. That saved my butt. And I think we're going to have another kind of realm, another type of phase like that where, 3/4 of the people in that role lose their job. 1/4 of the people get it, not because they're the best, because they're the ones that using the new AI tools the best. And
I was going to say, you have the same thing with we'll take something abstract that's think to be more of like a pencil in hand or marker in hand or paintbrush in hand with, let's say, graphic design. You have Adobe Photoshop that has AI now. It's kind of wild how something, thought to be just, canvas and paintbrush is now being served with AI to create images and that kind of stuff. It's kind of crazy.
There was a time when people said, I'm not going to allow any images that are created by a computer. Now that's standard. That became standard. Now it's like, any images.
That was like the whole Wikipedia argument you and I talked about too, where Wikipedia was thought to be absolutely off limits, and now they're allowing Wikipedia for source material.
I remember, Blake, being in high school and early on in college, and they would tell us, you are not allowed to cite anything from Wikipedia. You will get, you'll fail or whatever. And now it's please cite Wikipedia. It's extremely accurate.
Well,
so it's just funny how it switches.
It's gotten better. It's gotten better, but it had to intentionally drive that, right? It had to get there.
100%.
But there was a lot of junk information for a while, and you get that on a lot of searches. And AI even can produce junk information. So I tell everybody, says if you're expecting to get anything out of an AI without a person checking it and taking responsibility for it, you're just waiting for a problem to happen. There has to be a human in the loop with any of these systems, even when they get incredibly good. You need to have that human accountability. I checked it. I thought it was good.
I use it, being in sales and tech sales, 2 things. One, I think with AI and learning how to use the AI as a salesperson, it's just another tool in my toolbox that gives me an advantage, saves me time. I mean, I can, have it write up an email template by just putting in, the website link of what we do, and it'll generate stuff, tell it what type of clients and everything, which is great. I type up an email template, I'm still double and triple checking to make sure that damn thing put the right information out. And I don't know if a lot of people do that. I think they just assume that it's AI and it's really smart, and it's never wrong.
I get AI email every day, at least a dozen of them.
Yeah.
It's like reading the fine print. There's actually a fine print or like a little message on ChatGPT. It says ChatGPT makes mistakes. The very bottom of the prompt. So if you didn't read that, that's kind of your fault.
Well, that's kind of on you. But to go back to careers, I love the fact that with sales, yes, job. It's like the internet boom. Jobs are going to get taken. We'll figure it out. But with sales, you're not going to get rid of the human element of sales because people want that human-to-human interaction. I don't think salespeople like me are going to go away completely and be replaced by AI.
Whereas I don't think they'll go away completely. I think the guy is right in saying that your day-to-day salesmanship is going to change in some way, form, fashion, what have you.
That will have an impact on your performance.
100%.
Because you can now communicate with more people, get more things done. You can now, that should result in higher sales. That productivity will show in your cost per, benefit ratio of your work. And that's how it will show up. It's not going to, and the companies at a certain point will say, these are part of our tools, and people who are uncomfortable using those tools or unfamiliar with using them will have struggle, while the people who are proactive and learning those tools as tools will be better off. Now, it will become a danger. We're already seeing dangers of people using AI as friends and relationships and thinking of them and treating them in the wrong way. That will create mental health problems that will last us for a long time. I think that companies need to we need to restrict those AIs for kids under certain ages, and even people over certain ages. They're now prolific on the dating apps. So you get a dating app and you basically are trying to get a date with a girl, and so you're using AI to write your profile, AI to manipulate your image, and AI to do the communication.
Yeah.
And then you go on a first date and a girl goes, "Who the hell are you?"
Yeah. Or you both have used it and both of your full shit.
I don't know. Who the hell are you? I bet back in the 80s, there was videotape dating, and I was a single parent. And so
God, I remember there's like bits and jokes about that. Those are hilarious.
I went on a date with this woman, and her profile was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I just fell in love with her image. And I met her, and she was 10 years old, or like 50 pounds higher weight, bad complexion, and she had a cussing attitude of a Dominican sailor. It's like the date went really bad. So we have to be careful when we're using AI. Has the potential of tricking people into thinking that we have a relationship with the machine. And a lot of people don't realize that every single one of those encounters, every private thing we tell it, everything we're saying is going on a server.
Yeah, it's never. That's what people I think don't understand, man. Is that they think once I delete this, it's gone. It's not gone.
Yeah, it's not. It's on there forever.
It's somewhere. Somebody's looking at it. Somebody has seen it. There's a file name somewhere. It's in a repository. What have you? The shit is still there.
So
I think what's sad. I think what's sad is there's a program I know that you can take recordings of like deceased family members or friends, and it will use AI to basically bring them back vocally and like visually. And that's like, I don't think it's good mentally. I think that kind of mentally mess you up. Like, I understand
I get
to an
It's
extent.
the same reason people want to do seances. Sometimes we have a hard time letting go, and sometimes those things can help us ease that process a little bit. So I'm not one to judge about those things, but I can say that those same tools can be used to create fake porn of girls in high school. And so it's not, as I said, it's not the technology, it's how we're using it that will make a difference on humanity.
It's the driver, not the bus, I think is what you're getting at.
That's what we need to be focusing on. What are the use case scenarios we want to X out, we want to cut people off from, hard code that into the system controls, and then, start to figure out how we want to build from there. So now they're starting to get smarter at that. The latest release from Anthropic, the public version of Claude, if you ask any types of certain things that it doesn't want to do, it's going to just shut you down and cancel, not respond to the request. So I've even heard that the newest version is actually too restrictive. They're trying to be too safe. They got too restrictive. But we can do that. We can learn how to contain these machines so that they're not used for public malicious good. But that's only on consumer level types of products. We still have, deeper capabilities in enterprise and government level products that still could go wrong. So this is a long journey. It's taken us 70 years to get here, and we're just now realizing what we've done. It's going to take us a little while to figure out how to do this right. And I'm hopeful, even though the correlations for prophecies are adding up extremely fast, there's a part of me that's always the optimist. I'm hoping that I'm wrong, and that this is just a warning sign, and we can figure out how to get past this hurdle, and that AI can be used to create a really great utopian society. Hurdles to get through before we get there.
Yeah, for sure. So just to sort of round out the conversation as we sort of wrap up things in the conversation and everything, if there's one thing you want listeners, like people that are listening, wherever they're listening, whether it's on a computer, a cell phone, whatever, radio, what do you want them to take away from sort of your core contention with AI specifically? What is the one thing you want to sort of warn people of, and also sort of, I guess, get the other side sort of be hopeful for?
Embrace with caution. Easy as
I
that.
agree with that. I love that.
Potential that you can benefit in your personal life, in your career. You don't want to be left behind. It's not the devil. But it does have some risks, both at a personal level and at a government, social, international level. You can't do anything about those. So embrace the technology for what it is. Do it with get the most value out of it for your personal life and your personal goals, but be aware of what else is going on around that could harm you.
I think the good and the bad is sort of what you have to, I guess the core contention is it has good and bad, but we have to know how to use each one. So, Dan, I don't know if you have any more questions.
I guess the last question I have for you, I think everyone at some point they get to a low point in their life. I had that happen a few years ago where you're kind of down and depressed and think the world is kind of, the universe is against you. Obviously, you've been there before and worked your way to build a great empire. What would your advice be to somebody right now that's young listening to this that really is having a hard time? What advice would you give them?
The same advice I gave to myself for years. Don't let your past or any of those failures define your future. And no one's going to take care of your future but you. Do the best job you can. Only you can do it. But if you give up, then no one's going to, you don't fail until you've given up. Once you've given up, that's failure. But anything below that, it's not failure. That's just lessons learned. So don't let your past failures define your future, and don't give up just because it's hard. It's out there.
I was going to say, your background speaks volumes to that, man. I mean, like you touched on earlier in the episode, I mean, you were homeless at one point, you were sort of striving to survive, and then became part of these huge mega tech companies like Microsoft and that kind of stuff, and became, a pretty prominent figure, not just in the business, but in how the infrastructure of the company operates. Well, I mean, like you took it from, your thing is really like a rag to riches story. If anybody has, doubts about whether they could do something, you're a core example of somebody that's been able to walk through that fire.
Well, and I'll be honest with you guys, even during some of those years, I had to deal with post-traumatic stress from my childhood.
Yeah.
I had to deal with addiction and night terrors and social issues and all kinds of other problems that I had to one by one face and deal with, because if I didn't face it and deal with it, nobody else was going to do it. They were just all going to avoid me. And that was, I couldn't blame somebody else for responsibilities I had to take for myself. So it's an ongoing process. It's a never ending process, but doesn't mean it have to be a defeating process.
Makes sense. Dan, you all set?
Yeah. No, thank you. This was awesome, guy.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Been a lot of fun.
All right, so that's going to do it for this episode of Obscuracast, guys. Guy, thank you again for taking the time to walk through all of the weeds and the tall grass and everything. We really appreciate it, and for being willing to sort of connect the dots in places that it seems like most people are afraid to look to or even look for. But that's sort of the core contention, I think, of the entire episode is look for the knowledge. Don't worry about whether it's good or bad. I think it's knowledge all the same. And that's what people need to be striving to find out more about is what is this thing? How can it be beneficial? How can it be detrimental? And sort of bridge the gap and try to find sort of the crossing bridge there.
Yeah.
So if you want to
be emailing Guy with any, I'm going to be emailing Guy like, hey, what do I need to do here? What's really going on?
We definitely want to have you on for some more episodes. This is just one portion of his stuff as far as sort of what he does as an author and sort of a speculative type of person, which is really cool. So we're definitely interested in having you on for another episode. Like I said, if you guys want to go into a little bit deeper of Guy's work, make sure you visit GuyMorrisBooks.com. All of his books are available on there, as well as sort of quick synopses of sort of what the books are about. You can follow him on X at Guy Morris Books on Twitter and X, and then Instagram, author Guy Morris as well. Grab his books, follow the research, and decide for yourself how much of what he's talking about is absolute fiction and how much feels a little too close to home. So as always, you can follow us at Obscuracast everywhere. Like I said, we're on a multitude, if not every single platform for podcasts, Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, Good Pods, and all that kind of stuff. Just make sure you hit the follow button and follow us for more stuff. Hopefully like I said, we want to have Guy on for another episode, talk sort of about his other venues and stuff that has to do with sort of occult history and that kind of thing. So on X, we're at Obscuracast, and on TikTok, we're at Obscuracast FM, and then Instagram, Obscuracast as well. If you've got something out of this conversation, the best way to support us is to share the episode with a friend or somebody that would appreciate it. We really appreciate that too. We're going to be throwing it all over the place. So leave us a rating or a review of your favorite platform and just let us know where you're listening. And it helps more people find us as well as keeping the conversations going. For now, Guy, like I said, if you want to say a couple words just to the audience, just thank you for coming by. We really appreciate it. It was a pleasure, sir.
Well, it was a pleasure to talk with you guys. I love these deep conversations and all the speculation. Had a great time. Thank you for having me. I look forward to coming back.
Absolutely, sir. Until next time, you guys stay curious, stay critical, and don't be afraid to look in the dark. Dan, you got any final thoughts?
No, this was probably my favorite episode we've done. This was awesome.
Now, it was nice to have somebody that actually is somewhat more of an expert in the field of what we're talking about versus just two guys on a computer talking to each other, mulling over what we might think is as what is going on.
Well, and it's also nice being not the tinfoil hat guy,
or being the only tinfoil hat.
Like it's nice having another one. So it's awkward, It's
tinfoilers unite.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but we'll see you guys on the next episode, Guy. Thank you once again for being here, man. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right, take care, guys.
Bye.